The security footage showed Caleb Foster's credentials destroying Sphere's financial network at 2:17 p.m., except Caleb wasn't anywhere near that terminal. Within 11 minutes, a 32-year-old father lost everything: his job, his reputation, his ability to feed his 6-year-old daughter. Nathan Cole's perfect frame job had worked flawlessly, until a child's crayon drawing with one tiny timestamp shattered the entire conspiracy. This is the story of how innocence exposed corruption, how a billionaire CEO chose truth over convenience, and how one snowstorm in Chicago changed 3 lives forever. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in Sphere's 43rd floor hummed with the kind of sterile indifference that only corporate architecture could achieve. Caleb Foster sat hunched over his workstation, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, while his daughter Sophie colored quietly in the corner near the western windows. "Daddy, can I use the orange?" Sophie's voice barely carried over the ambient noise of servers and air conditioning. "Sure, sweetheart." Caleb didn't look up from his screen. He was running diagnostics on the backup systems, routine maintenance that any senior engineer could handle in his sleep. "Just stay where I can see you, okay?" "I always do." Outside, Chicago had transformed into something brutal. The February snowstorm had started as flurries around noon but quickly escalated into a whiteout that shut down half the city. Schools closed. The L train stopped running. Sophie's elementary school had sent out emergency alerts at 11 a.m., which meant Caleb had no choice but to bring her to work. His supervisor, Marcus Chen, hadn't been thrilled about it. "This is a professional environment, Foster, not a daycare. I understand, she'll be quiet. You won't even know she's here." Marcus had stared at him for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Make sure she stays away from anything sensitive." That was 3 hours ago. Now Sophie sat cross-legged on the industrial carpet, surrounded by her backpack, a juice box, and her worn case of colored pencils. She'd already drawn 2 pictures, one of their apartment building, another of the neighbor's dog. Currently, she was sketching something new: an orange cat sitting by a window while snow fell outside. Caleb glanced at the clock. 2:14 p.m. Almost time for the weekly backup verification. He pulled up the schedule, confirmed the automated sequences were running smoothly, then returned to his diagnostic report. Everything looked normal, clean, exactly as it should be. At 2:17 p.m., the entire 43rd floor exploded into chaos. Not literally. There were no flames, no smoke, no physical destruction. But every screen across the engineering department suddenly went black, then flashed red with error messages that scrolled too fast to read. The ambient hum of servers shifted into something higher-pitched, almost panicked. Somewhere down the hall, someone shouted. Caleb's stomach dropped. He immediately pulled up the system logs, fingers flying across the keyboard as he tried to understand what was happening. The network monitoring dashboard showed catastrophic failures cascading through Sphere's entire financial infrastructure, trading systems offline, transaction databases corrupted, backup servers unresponsive. "What the hell?" Marcus Chen appeared behind him, face pale. "Foster, what did you do?" "Nothing. I was running standard diagnostics." "Then why is everything crashing?" "I don't know." Caleb's mind raced through possibilities. Hardware failure, cyber attack, some kind of malware. "Give me a minute to trace the source." But he didn't get a minute. Within seconds, 3 other engineers crowded around his workstation, all talking at once, all pointing at their own screens showing the same cascading failures. Marcus was already on his phone, presumably calling upper management. Someone mentioned the word millions in a tone that suggested they weren't talking about recovery time. Sophie appeared at Caleb's elbow, clutching her drawing. "Daddy, why is everyone yelling?" "It's okay, baby. Just some computer problems." He tried to keep his voice calm even as his pulse hammered. "Go back to your spot, okay? I need to fix this." She hesitated, picking up on the tension that filled the room like static electricity, then retreated to her corner by the windows. Caleb forced himself to focus. He pulled up the security access logs, searching for the entry point of whatever had caused this disaster. The logs were massive, thousands of entries per minute across hundreds of workstations, but there had to be a pattern, a signature, something that explained. His own username appeared in the restricted server access log. 2:16 p.m. Terminal 7B, root-level access to the core financial database. Caleb stared at the entry, feeling the floor tilt beneath him. "That's impossible," he whispered. Terminal 7B was in the restricted server room on the 44th floor. He hadn't been anywhere near it. He'd been sitting right here, running diagnostics on the backup systems, with Sophie 15 feet away drawing pictures. "Marcus," Caleb's voice came out steadier than he felt. "I need you to look at this." But Marcus was still on the phone, and his expression had shifted from alarmed to something colder. When he ended the call, he looked at Caleb with an expression that made something in Caleb's chest constrict. "Security's on their way," Marcus said quietly. "Don't touch anything." "What? Marcus, wait, I didn't—" "The logs show your credentials accessed the core servers 2 minutes ago. Whatever happened, it traces directly back to you." "That's not possible. I've been sitting right here the entire time. Sophie can confirm." "Your 6-year-old daughter isn't exactly a credible witness, Foster." Marcus crossed his arms. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but this is above my pay grade now. Just wait for security." The other engineers had backed away from Caleb's workstation like he was radioactive. Some were whispering to each other. Others were already pulling up their own logs, probably trying to cover their own asses in case the blame spread. Caleb felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that always appeared when the world decided he was guilty before asking questions. He'd felt it when Sophie's mother left without warning. He'd felt it when the bank denied his loan modification. He'd felt it every time someone looked at him and saw struggling single father instead of competent engineer. But this was different. This was professional annihilation. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, are you in trouble?" "No, baby." The lie tasted bitter. "Everything's going to be fine." Security arrived in the form of 2 stone-faced men in dark suits who asked Caleb to step away from his workstation. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't touch him. They simply stood there with the kind of authority that made resistance pointless. "Sir, we need you to come with us." "I understand, but I need to explain. There's been some kind of mistake. You can explain upstairs." Upstairs meant the executive floor, the place where decisions got made by people who dealt in quarterly reports and shareholder confidence, not reality. Caleb grabbed his jacket. Sophie gathered her colored pencils with trembling hands, stuffing them back into her backpack with the kind of forced calm that broke his heart. She'd gotten too good at staying quiet when adults were upset. They took the elevator in silence. The security guards flanked him like he might run. Sophie pressed against his side, holding his hand with both of hers. The executive floor smelled like expensive carpet and intimidation. Caleb had only been up here twice before, once during his initial hiring interview, and once for a company-wide presentation where he'd stood in the back and tried not to exist. They were led into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Chicago's snow-covered skyline. Under different circumstances, Caleb might have appreciated it. Now it just felt like a reminder of how far he was about to fall. 3 executives sat waiting. Marcus Chen, who'd apparently rushed upstairs ahead of them, Patricia Volkov, the chief financial officer, and Gerald Reeves, head of legal. Sophie's hand tightened around his. Patricia Volkov didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Foster, we've reviewed the preliminary logs from today's system failure. Your credentials were used to access restricted servers and execute commands that resulted in catastrophic damage to our financial network." "I didn't access those servers." Caleb kept his voice level. "I was on the 43rd floor running diagnostics on the backup systems. I haven't left my workstation since noon." "The logs suggest otherwise. Then someone used my credentials without authorization. Someone cloned my access remotely, or—" "That seems rather convenient, doesn't it?" Gerald Reeves leaned forward, his expression sharp. "A catastrophic failure occurs, and your immediate defense is that someone else must have stolen your identity." "It's not a defense, it's what happened." Patricia's eyes flicked to Sophie, who was trying very hard to disappear into the leather chair. "Mr. Foster, you understand the severity of this situation. Axion Sphere's financial network handles billions in transactions daily. This failure has already cost us millions, with potential losses escalating by the hour. Our clients are demanding answers. Our shareholders are demanding accountability." "I understand that, but punishing the wrong person won't fix anything." "The evidence points to you." "Then the evidence is wrong. Caleb's voice rose despite himself. He took a breath, forcing himself back under control. Look, I know how this looks, but I'm telling you, I did not access those servers. I have no reason to sabotage this company. This job is everything to me. It's how I feed my daughter. It's how I keep a roof over our heads. Why would I destroy that? Gerald Reeves exchanged a glance with Patricia. Disgruntled employees commit sabotage all the time, Mr. Foster. Financial stress, personal grudges, mental instability. I'm not mentally unstable. Perhaps not, but you're clearly under significant strain. Patricia's tone softened slightly, which somehow made it worse. Single parent, financial difficulties, high stress position, these factors create pressure that can lead to poor decisions. Caleb felt the argument slipping away from him. They'd already decided. The log said he was guilty, and that was enough. No one wanted to dig deeper, to consider alternatives, to admit that their security systems might have vulnerabilities. They wanted a scapegoat, and he was convenient. If you let me examine the logs myself, Caleb tried one more time, I can prove someone else accessed those servers using my credentials. Waysome, that won't be possible. Patricia's voice had returned to its professional coldness. As of this moment, your access to all Axion Sphere systems is revoked, replacing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Administrative leave. Corporate speak for, you're fired, we just need the paperwork. How long will the investigation take? As long as necessary, which meant forever. Which meant they'd drag it out until he couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't fight back, couldn't do anything except accept whatever settlement they offered to make him go away quietly. Gerald Reeves slid a document across the polished conference table. This is a temporary suspension agreement. Sign it, and we'll continue your health insurance for 30 days while we investigate. Refuse, and we'll terminate you immediately for cause. Caleb picked up the document with shaking hands. The legal language was dense, deliberately confusing, designed to protect the company rather than him. But the core message was clear. Sign this or lose everything right now. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. Daddy? He looked down at his daughter's worried face and felt something crack inside his chest. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand that her father was being accused of destroying millions of dollars, didn't understand that their carefully balanced life was disintegrating in real time. All she understood was that her daddy was in trouble. Caleb signed the document. You'll need to surrender your building access badge, Gerald added. Security will escort you out. The walk back to the elevator felt endless. Engineers who'd worked alongside Caleb for 4 years suddenly found their screens fascinating. Administrative assistants who'd always smiled at Sophie now looked away. Word had already spread through the building. Caleb Foster had sabotaged the company, guilty until proven innocent. Except proving innocence required resources he didn't have. The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell. Sophie pressed against him, quiet and small. The security guards maintained their professional distance. Nobody spoke. The lobby was worse. Dozens of employees milled around, waiting out the snowstorm, and every single one of them seemed to know what had just happened. Conversation stopped as Caleb walked past. People stared. Some looked shocked. Others looked angry. A few looked satisfied, like they'd always suspected he wasn't quite good enough for Axion Sphere. The security guards followed him all the way to the main entrance. Your badge, sir. Caleb unclipped the ID badge from his belt and handed it over. 4 years of loyalty, reduced to a piece of plastic being dropped into a security guard's pocket. You'll receive information about the investigation by email, one of them said. Don't attempt to access the building or contact any employees about this matter. Then they held the door open, a polite invitation to leave. The February wind hit like a fist. Snow swirled across Michigan Avenue, turning Chicago into a blur of white and gray. Caleb pulled Sophie's hood up, made sure her scarf covered her face, then stepped out into the storm. Behind them, through the glass walls of Axion Sphere's lobby, employees watched him leave. Nobody came after him. Nobody called out to say they believed in his innocence. Nobody offered help. Sophie's voice was muffled by her scarf. Where are we going? Home, baby. But you said we'd get hot chocolate after you finished working. Caleb's throat tightened. He'd promised her hot chocolate at the cafe 2 blocks away, the one with the oversized marshmallows that she loved. That promise felt like it belonged to a different lifetime, one where he still had a job and dignity and a future. Not today. Maybe next week. They walked toward the parking garage, snow crunching under their feet. Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably Marcus or HR sending official documentation about his suspension. He ignored it. Right now, all that mattered was getting Sophie somewhere warm and safe before he fell apart completely. The parking garage was nearly empty. Most people had left early to beat the storm. Their car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with rust spots and a temperamental heater, sat in its usual spot on the third level. Caleb opened the back door, helped Sophie into her booster seat, made sure her seatbelt was secure. His hands moved automatically through familiar motions while his mind screamed. How was he going to pay rent? How was he going to buy groceries? How was he going to explain to Sophie that everything had just fallen apart? He slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Snow accumulated on the windshield, blocking out the world. For a moment, he let himself sit in the darkness and feel the full weight of what had just happened. Then Sophie's voice from the back seat. "Daddy? Are you crying?" "No, sweetheart." He wiped his eyes quickly. "Just tired." "You said lying is bad." Despite everything, Caleb almost laughed. Sophie had inherited her mother's ability to see through bullshit, a trait that was both endearing and occasionally inconvenient. "You're right. I'm sorry." He turned to look at her. "I am sad. Something bad happened at work, and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it." "Is it because of the computers being broken?" "Sort of." "But you're really good at computers. You fix them all the time." "I know, baby. But sometimes grown-up problems are more complicated than that." Sophie considered this, her expression serious in the way only 6-year-olds could manage. "Are we still going to be okay?" The question gutted him, because he didn't know. He had $843 in his checking account. Rent was due in 12 days. Sophie needed new winter boots because she'd outgrown her current pair. The Civic needed an oil change. The electric bill was already past due. Without his Axion Sphere salary, they were maybe 3 weeks away from complete financial collapse. But he couldn't tell Sophie that. "We're going to be fine," he lied, and hated himself for it. "I promise." He started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage, windshield wipers fighting against the snow. The drive home normally took 20 minutes, but in this weather it would take closer to 40. They were halfway there when Sophie said, "I forgot my drawing." Caleb glanced in the rearview mirror. "Which one?" "The orange cat. I left it on the floor by the windows." "We'll get you more paper at home. You can draw another one. But I put the time on that one, like you showed me." Something flickered in Caleb's mind, but he was too exhausted to chase it down. "What time did you put?" 2:15, because that's when I finished the cat's tail. 2:15 p.m., 2 minutes before his credentials had supposedly accessed the restricted servers on the 44th floor. Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sophie had been drawing at 2:15, and if she'd written down the time, that meant she'd been observing him, which meant he'd been visible to her, sitting at his workstation on the 43rd floor, nowhere near Terminal 7B. A 6-year-old's drawing might not be admissible in court, but it was proof. Proof that he'd been exactly where he claimed to be when the system crashed, except the drawing was still in Axion Sphere's building, probably already thrown away by the cleaning crew. "Daddy, you okay?" "Yeah, baby." His mind was racing now, thinking through possibilities. "When we get home, can you draw that picture again for me, with the time?" "I guess, but it won't be the same." "That's okay. Just do your best." They pulled into the parking lot of their apartment building 20 minutes later. The complex was old, tired, the kind of place where the landlord only fixed things when legally required. But it was home, it was safe, it was theirs. Inside their 2-bedroom apartment, Caleb cranked up the heat and helped Sophie out of her snow-covered jacket. She immediately went to the kitchen table and started laying out her colored pencils, determined to recreate her lost drawing. Caleb made her a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, the only combination she'd eat consistently, then collapsed onto the couch and finally let himself check his phone. 17 missed calls, 34 emails. Most were from Axion Sphere's automated systems. Access revoked, insurance information, legal notifications. But 3 were from numbers he didn't recognize. The first voicemail was from a reporter asking for comment on the Axion Sphere sabotage incident. The second was from a different reporter asking if he planned to sue for wrongful termination. The third was from someone claiming to be a lawyer who specialized in corporate defense cases. Word had spread fast. Probably some Sphere employee had leaked the story to the media, eager to look like a hero by exposing the criminal in their midst. Caleb deleted all the voicemails without listening to the rest. His email contained one message that made his stomach clench: a formal notification from HR that his health insurance would terminate in 30 days unless he signed additional paperwork agreeing not to pursue legal action against the company. They were boxing him in, making it impossible to fight back without sacrificing the one thing Sophie needed most: medical coverage. "Daddy?" Sophie appeared beside the couch, holding up her recreation of the orange cat drawing. "Is this good?" Caleb studied it. She'd done her best to match the original, complete with the timestamp written in careful numbers in the upper corner, 2:15 p.m. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Can we hang it on the fridge?" "Absolutely." He stood up, carried the drawing to the kitchen, and secured it with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. Sophie beamed with pride. For a moment, standing in their small kitchen with his daughter smiling up at him, Caleb let himself pretend that everything was fine, that they weren't teetering on the edge of financial ruin, that his professional reputation wasn't being destroyed across Chicago's tech industry, that tomorrow morning he'd wake up and this would all turn out to be a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was reality. And reality didn't offer easy escapes. That night, after putting Sophie to bed and reading her 2 chapters of her current favorite book about a magical library, Caleb sat in the darkness of his bedroom and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do next. He could try to find another job, but who would hire him after this? The tech industry was small. Everyone talked. By tomorrow, his name would be associated with sabotage and corporate disaster. He could try to fight Sphere legally, but lawyers cost money he didn't have. And even if he won, the process would take years. Years he couldn't afford. He could take whatever settlement they offered and disappear, but that felt like admitting guilt, like proving everyone right who'd ever looked at him and seen a failure. His phone buzzed. Another email. This one from a name he recognized. Nathan Cole. Subject line: "Sorry about today." Caleb almost deleted it without reading, but something made him open it. "Hey man, I heard what happened. That's rough. If you need a reference for your next job, let me know. I'll put in a good word for you. Nathan." The message was friendly, supportive even, but something about it felt wrong. Nathan Cole worked in the same department, specialized in network security, had always been professionally cordial, but never exactly warm. Why would he suddenly reach out now? Caleb stared at the email for a long time, trying to identify what bothered him about it. The tone was off, just slightly. Too eager. Too helpful. Like someone trying very hard to seem innocent. He pulled up his laptop and started searching through his work files, looking for anything that might explain today's disaster. His access to Sphere's internal systems had been revoked, but he still had local copies of diagnostic reports and system logs from the past few weeks. At 2 a.m, he found something interesting. 3 weeks ago, someone had run a security audit on the credential management system, the system that controlled employee access to restricted servers. The audit had flagged several vulnerabilities that could potentially allow credential theft or remote access hijacking. The person who'd run that audit was Nathan Cole. The recommended fixes had never been implemented. Caleb sat back staring at his laptop screen as pieces started clicking into place. Nathan had identified security vulnerabilities weeks ago. Nathan worked in network security, which meant he had the expertise to exploit those vulnerabilities. Nathan had sent that oddly friendly email tonight, almost like he was trying to establish plausible deniability. It wasn't proof, but it was suspicious as hell. Caleb spent the next hour combing through every file he had, looking for connections. He found emails where Nathan had asked detailed questions about server access protocols. He found notes from a meeting where Nathan had specifically asked about Caleb's workstation assignment. Still not proof, but the pattern was there. At 3 a.m, exhausted and wired on too much coffee, Caleb finally admitted he was in over his head. Even if Nathan was involved, proving it required access to systems Caleb no longer had, required resources he couldn't afford, required someone in power who actually gave a damn about the truth. He closed his laptop and went to check on Sophie. She was sprawled across her bed, covers kicked off, stuffed animals scattered around her like casualties of war. Caleb gently pulled the blanket back over her, tucked her favorite bear into her arms, and just stood there watching her sleep. She deserved better than this. Better than a father who couldn't protect his own job. Better than an apartment with questionable heating and a landlord who didn't fix things. Better than a future that suddenly looked frighteningly uncertain. Tomorrow, he'd figure out the next step. Tonight, he just needed to survive until morning. 4 floors above Chicago's snow-covered streets, in an office that probably cost more than Caleb's entire annual salary, Vivian Sinclair reviewed the preliminary damage reports from today's system failure. She'd been in London when it happened, meeting with investors about a potential acquisition, when her assistant called with news of the catastrophic crash. She'd immediately booked the next flight back, arriving at O'Hare just as the evening news started running stories about Sphere's security breach. Now, at nearly 4 in the morning, she sat in her office reading through the executive team's summary of events. One name appeared repeatedly: Caleb Foster. According to the report, Foster was a senior systems engineer with 4 years of solid performance reviews. No disciplinary issues, no red flags, just steady, competent work. Then suddenly, he'd allegedly destroyed millions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Vivian didn't believe in sudden transformations. People didn't go from model employees to saboteurs without warning signs. Either Foster had been planning this for months, in which case there would be evidence beyond a single access log entry, or something else was going on. She pulled up Foster's personnel file. Single father. Daughter in elementary school. Address in a lower middle-class neighborhood. Salary that was decent but not exceptional. She cross-referenced his access logs from the past 6 months. Regular patterns, normal working hours, occasional late nights but nothing suspicious. No unauthorized access attempts. No unusual data transfers. Then she looked at today's logs specifically. Foster's credentials had accessed Terminal 7B at 2:16 p.m. The sabotage commands were executed at 2:17 p.m. The system crashed at 2:18 p.m. 3 minutes. Clean and efficient. Too clean. Vivian had built 3 companies from near bankruptcy into billion-dollar enterprises. She'd learned to recognize patterns, to see inconsistencies that others missed. And something about this timeline bothered her. She picked up her phone and called security. "I need the full surveillance footage from today, every camera on the 43rd and 44th floors, and I need Foster's complete access history for the past 3 months." "Yes, Ms. Sinclair. Should we also pull the footage from the server room?" "Everything. I want to see exactly what happened today." She hung up and returned to the reports, reading between the lines of corporate speak and legal careful language. The investigation had been remarkably fast, less than an hour from system crash to employee termination. That kind of speed suggested either overwhelming evidence or a rush to judgment. Vivian had built her reputation on never rushing to judgment. At 4:30 a.m., security delivered the requested files to her office. She spent the next hour reviewing surveillance footage, watching Caleb Foster go through his day. Arrive at 11:47 a.m. with a small girl in a winter coat. Talk with his supervisor. Settle the girl near the western windows. Sit down at his workstation and begin working. At 2:15 p.m., the girl was drawing. Foster was visible at his desk, clearly focused on his screen. At 2:16 p.m., the timestamp when his credentials supposedly accessed Terminal 7B on the 44th floor, Foster was still at his desk on the 43rd floor. Still visible. Still working. Nowhere near the restricted server room. Vivian rewound the footage and watched it again. Then again. The timestamps were clear. The camera angles left no room for doubt. Unless Caleb Foster had somehow developed the ability to be in 2 places at once. He couldn't have personally accessed Terminal 7B while simultaneously sitting at his 43rd floor workstation, which meant someone else had used his credentials. Vivian sat back in her chair, fingers steepled, thinking. Corporate sabotage wasn't uncommon. Disgruntled employees, industrial espionage, internal power struggles. She'd seen it all. But this felt different. This felt personal. Someone had gone to significant effort to frame Caleb Foster specifically. The question was, why? She pulled up the employee directory and started cross-referencing everyone who had the technical expertise to pull off this kind of attack. The list was shorter than expected, maybe a dozen people with the necessary access and skills. One name appeared in multiple contexts: Nathan Cole, Network Security Specialist, 4 years with the company. Recent performance reviews noted him as ambitious and eager to advance. Vivian opened Cole's file and started reading. An hour later, as dawn broke over Chicago's snow-covered skyline, Vivian Sinclair made a decision. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "I need you to locate Caleb Foster's contact information, then schedule him to come in this morning at 10. "Ms. Sinclair, Foster was terminated yesterday. He's been banned from the building. I'm aware. Tell security he has clearance for a meeting in my office. Personal invitation from me directly." "Yes, ma'am." Vivian ended the call and turned to look out at the city waking up beneath her. Somewhere out there, Caleb Foster probably thought his life was over. Thought nobody cared about the truth. Thought the system had already decided his guilt. He was wrong. Because Vivian Sinclair hadn't built 3 successful companies by accepting convenient narratives. She'd built them by finding the truth, no matter how buried it was. And something told her that finding the truth about yesterday's sabotage was going to reveal something much bigger than a simple system crash. Caleb woke to his phone vibrating on the nightstand. For a disoriented moment, he thought it was his alarm for work. Then yesterday crashed back into his consciousness like cold water, and he remembered he didn't have work anymore. The clock read 8:47 a.m. He grabbed the phone, expecting another reporter or lawyer. Instead, the screen showed a number with Axion Sphere's exchange. His thumb hovered over the decline button. Nothing good could come from this call. Probably HR, with more paperwork designed to protect the company while burying him deeper. But something made him answer. "This is Caleb." "Mr. Foster, this is Rebecca Marsh, executive assistant to Vivian Sinclair. Ms. Sinclair would like to meet with you this morning at 10 o'clock. Caleb sat up, fully awake now. Vivian Sinclair, the CEO. The woman who'd built Axion Sphere from a failing startup into a tech empire, who'd been profiled in Forbes and Time, who probably didn't know Caleb existed until yesterday, when his name became associated with millions in damages. Why does she want to meet with me? She didn't specify. She simply asked me to arrange the meeting. Rebecca's tone was professionally neutral. Will you be available? Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. Maybe they wanted him to sign more paperwork. Maybe they wanted to offer some pathetic settlement in exchange for his silence. Maybe they just wanted to threaten him in person. But underneath the paranoia was something else. Curiosity. Because if they just wanted him gone quietly, they wouldn't have the CEO personally request a meeting. I'm not sure I'm allowed in the building, Caleb said carefully. Security banned me yesterday. Miss Sinclair has arranged clearance. I'll notify the front desk to expect you at 10. What should I bring? Just yourself, Mr. Foster. The call ended before he could ask anything else. Caleb stared at his phone, trying to read meaning into a conversation that had been deliberately vague. Vivian Sinclair wanted to see him, personally. Less than 24 hours after he'd been escorted out of the building like a criminal. That wasn't normal procedure. In the kitchen, Sophie was already awake, eating cereal at the table while watching cartoons on the tablet he'd bought her last Christmas. She looked up when he entered. You look worried again. Just thinking. He poured himself coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burned water but contained enough caffeine to function. I have to go back to the office this morning. I thought you got fired. The bluntness of 6-year-olds never stopped being startling. I did, but the boss wants to talk to me. Are you in more trouble? I don't know, baby. Maybe. Maybe not. He sat across from her, watching her methodically work through her cereal. I need you to stay with Mrs. Chen downstairs for a couple hours, okay? Mrs. Chen was their neighbor, a retired teacher who occasionally watched Sophie when Caleb's schedule got complicated. She never asked for payment, just seemed to enjoy the company. Caleb always tried to pay her anyway, but she usually refused. Can I bring my coloring books? Sure. And the new drawing? The one with the time? Caleb glanced at the refrigerator where Sophie's recreation of the orange cat drawing hung. You want to bring that one? I want to show Mrs. Chen. She likes cats. Okay, but be careful with it. At 9:30, Caleb dropped Sophie at Mrs. Chen's apartment with her backpack full of entertainment. Mrs. Chen took one look at his face and seemed to understand that something serious was happening, but she didn't pry. Just smiled at Sophie and invited her in to help make cookies. Caleb drove back toward Axion Sphere through streets still choked with yesterday's snow. Chicago's plows had cleared the main roads, but side streets remained treacherous. The drive took 40 minutes instead of 20. He parked in a public garage 2 blocks away. He wasn't sure if his parking access had been revoked along with everything else, and walked through the cold morning air toward the glass tower that had been his professional home for 4 years. The lobby looked the same as yesterday. Same expensive marble, same corporate art on the walls. But now Caleb felt like an intruder, someone who didn't belong in this world of success and money. The security guard at the front desk checked his ID with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for actual criminals. "You're cleared to the executive floor, Ms. Sinclair's office. Elevator bank C." "Thanks." The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have. Caleb caught his reflection in the polished metal doors and barely recognized himself. He looked exhausted, older, like someone who'd aged a decade overnight. The executive floor was quieter than he remembered. Thick carpet absorbed sound. The lighting was warmer, more expensive. Everything designed to project power and control. Rebecca Marsh met him at the elevator. She was younger than her voice suggested, maybe late 20s, with the kind of efficient competence that suggested she'd been managing difficult situations since birth. "Mr. Foster, right this way." She led him down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than his car. At the end was a set of double doors made from some dark wood that looked like it had been cut from trees older than the country. Rebecca knocked once, then opened the door. "Miss Sinclair, Mr. Foster is here." "Send him in." Vivian Sinclair's office was bigger than Caleb's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago stretching toward the lake. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive. Everything in the room suggested someone who valued function over decoration, efficiency over comfort. Vivian herself stood by the windows, holding a coffee cup and looking out at the city. She was smaller than he'd expected from her photographs, maybe 5'6", wearing a charcoal suit that managed to look both professional and somehow threatening. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. No jewelry except a watch that probably cost more than Caleb's annual rent. She turned to face him, and Caleb was struck by her eyes, sharp, calculating, the kind of eyes that saw through bullshit instantly. "Mr. Foster, thank you for coming." She gestured to a chair near her desk. "Please sit." Caleb sat, feeling like he'd been summoned to the principal's office. Vivian took the chair across from him, not behind her desk. The positioning felt deliberate, like she was trying to signal this wasn't a formal interrogation. But it didn't feel casual either. "I've been reviewing the incident from yesterday," Vivian said without preamble. "The timeline doesn't make sense." Caleb blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected to hear. "What do you mean?" "The logs show your credentials accessing Terminal 7B at 2:16 p.m., but the surveillance footage shows you at your workstation on the 43rd floor at that exact time. Unless you've developed the ability to teleport, someone else used your credentials to access that terminal." Hope flared in Caleb's chest, sudden and painful. "You believe me?" "I believe the evidence." Vivian's expression didn't change. "The question is who had both the technical capability and the motivation to frame you specifically." "I've been thinking about that." Caleb leaned forward. "Nathan Cole. He works in network security. 3 weeks ago, he ran an audit that identified vulnerabilities in the credential management system. The recommended fixes were never implemented." "You think Cole exploited those vulnerabilities?" "I think it's worth investigating. He sent me an email last night offering to be a reference for my next job. It felt off, too friendly, like he was trying to establish that we were on good terms." Vivian pulled out her tablet and made a note. "What else?" "He's been asking questions about server access protocols for weeks, specifically about my workstation assignment. At the time, I thought he was just doing his job. Now I'm not sure." "That's circumstantial." "I know, but it's more than we had yesterday." Vivian studied him for a long moment. "You're not angry." "What?" "You were falsely accused, publicly humiliated, fired without a real investigation. Most people would be furious right now, demanding apologies, threatening lawsuits. But you're sitting here calmly presenting theories about who might have framed you." Caleb shrugged. "Anger doesn't fix problems. It just makes them harder to solve." "Where did you learn that?" "Single parent. You learn pretty fast that losing your temper in front of a 6-year-old just scares her. Better to stay calm and focus on solutions." Something flickered across Vivian's face, too quick to identify. Tell me about yesterday. Everything you remember. So Caleb walked her through the entire day, bringing Sophie to work because of the school closure, settling her by the windows with colored pencils, running routine diagnostics. The moment everything crashed, the accusations, the security escort, the termination meeting. Vivian listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her tablet. Your daughter was drawing the entire time? Most of it, yeah. She goes through colored pencils like other kids go through candy. And she wrote a timestamp on one of her drawings? 2:15 p.m. I taught her how to tell time a few months ago, and now she puts timestamps on everything. Drives her teacher crazy. Where's this drawing now? Caleb's stomach sank. Still in the building. She left it on the floor by the west windows on the 43rd floor. Probably got thrown away by the cleaning crew. Probably. Vivian stood and walked to her desk, picking up a piece of paper. Unless someone found it first. She handed him the paper. It was Sophie's drawing, the orange cat, the snowy window, and in the upper corner, written in careful, childish handwriting, 2:15 p.m. Caleb stared at it, something tight unwinding in his chest. How did you? I reviewed all the surveillance footage from yesterday. I saw your daughter leave this behind. I had security retrieve it before the cleaners arrived. Vivian returned to her chair. This drawing places you on the 43rd floor at 2:15 p.m. The attack occurred at 2:16 p.m. on the 44th floor. Even if you'd sprinted the moment she finished this, you couldn't have reached Terminal 7B in time to execute those commands. So this proves I'm innocent. It proves you didn't personally access that terminal, but the company could argue you had an accomplice, or that you set up the attack beforehand using automated scripts. Vivian's expression was unreadable. In court, this drawing would be circumstantial evidence at best. Your daughter's testimony wouldn't be considered reliable given her age and obvious bias. The hope that had flared earlier guttered like a candle in wind. So we're back where we started. Not quite, because I don't believe you're guilty, Mr. Foster, and I have resources you don't. Why do you care? The question came out harsher than intended. No offense, but you run a billion-dollar company. I'm just another employee. Why does it matter to you whether I'm innocent or not? Vivian was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful, controlled. 2 years ago, my younger brother was accused of embezzling from his employer. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital paper trail, witness testimony, motive, opportunity. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years. She paused, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 6 months into his sentence, the real embezzler confessed. Someone who'd worked alongside my brother and framed him to cover their own crimes. By the time the truth came out, my brother had already lost everything. His career, his marriage, his faith in the system that was supposed to protect innocent people. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important. Vivian turned back to face him. Convenient narratives are almost always wrong. The truth is usually more complicated, more buried, and requires someone to actually give a damn enough to dig for it. Caleb understood then. This wasn't about him specifically. This was about Vivian's need to not make the same mistake that had destroyed her brother. So what do? We find proof. Real proof that will stand up in court and destroy whoever actually did this. Vivian pulled up files on her tablet. I've already started pulling Nathan Cole's complete access history. Every email, every workstation login, every security badge scan for the past 3 months. If he's involved, there will be patterns. That could take days to review. Then we'll take days. I've cleared my schedule. You're going to personally investigate this? Do you have a better option? Caleb thought about the $800 in his checking account, the rent due in 11 days, the lawyer fees he couldn't afford. No, I don't. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 3 hours in Vivian's office, going through digital records with the kind of methodical attention that made Caleb's eyes burn. Vivian had access to systems even Caleb hadn't known existed, internal monitoring tools that tracked everything employees did on company networks. Nathan Cole's access history was extensive. Network security gave him legitimate reasons to be in dozens of different systems, which made finding suspicious patterns harder. But Vivian was relentless. Here, she highlighted a series of entries. Cole accessed the credential management system 8 times in the 2 weeks before the attack. Each session lasted between 45 minutes and 2 hours. What would require that much time? Caleb studied the logs. Normal security audits are automated. They run in minutes. If Cole was manually accessing the system for hours, he was doing something that couldn't be automated, like testing vulnerabilities or exploiting them, building backdoors, setting up the infrastructure he'd need to hijack someone else's credentials. They kept digging. Around noon, Rebecca brought in lunch, sandwiches and coffee that Caleb didn't taste. He was too focused on the patterns emerging from the data. Look at this. Caleb pointed to a cluster of entries. 5 days ago, Cole accessed the personnel database and specifically pulled up my employee file. Then he accessed the workstation assignment logs. Why would he need to know which desk I was using? Because he needed to make sure the attack would be traced back to you specifically, not just any random terminal. Vivian made notes. He was building a profile, learning your routines, your access patterns, your physical location. They found more. Emails where Cole had asked pointed questions about server room security protocols. Access logs showing him entering restricted areas during off hours when fewer cameras would capture his movements. Search history on his work computer that included queries about credential spoofing and remote terminal access. Individually, each piece was explainable. Collectively, they painted a picture of someone carefully planning a sophisticated attack. At 2 o'clock, Vivian leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. It's not enough. What do you mean? We have circumstantial evidence, suspicious patterns, nothing that definitively proves Cole executed the attack. A good lawyer would argue that everything we found is consistent with Cole doing his job as a security specialist. Caleb felt frustration building. So we need the smoking gun. We need access to the actual terminal used in the attack, Terminal 7B. If Cole was there, there will be physical evidence. Fingerprints, DNA, something. Can't security pull that? They could, but if I request it through official channels, it'll trigger questions. People will start asking why the CEO is personally investigating a case that's already been closed. Vivian's expression hardened. And if Cole has allies in the company, they'll destroy evidence before we can secure it. So we're stuck. Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, then stood. I need to take this call. It's the board chairman. He's probably calling about yesterday's financial losses. She stepped out into the hallway, leaving Caleb alone in her office. He stood and walked to the windows, looking out at Chicago spread below. From up here, the city looked clean, organized, manageable. Nothing like the messy reality of actual people's lives. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Sophie is fine. Made cookies. Take your time. The simple kindness of it made his throat tight. Mrs. Chen didn't know the details of what was happening, but she knew enough to help without asking questions. That was worth more than all the expensive corporate gestures in the world. Vivian returned 10 minutes later, her expression grim. The board wants answers. They're threatening to launch an external investigation if I can't provide a comprehensive report by Monday. What does that mean? It means we have 4 days to solve this before the investigation gets taken out of my hands and handed to people who will prioritize the company's public image over finding the truth. 4 days. Caleb thought about everything they still needed to prove, all the evidence they still needed to find. It felt impossible. But then he thought about Sophie's drawing, about one tiny detail that had survived when everything else fell apart. We need to talk to the people who work near Terminal 7B, Caleb said. Someone might have seen Cole in the server room that day. The server room is restricted access. There shouldn't be anyone near it. But people take breaks, walk past on their way to other areas. Maybe someone saw something without realizing it was important. Vivian considered this. It's a long shot. Everything we have is a long shot. She smiled slightly, the first real expression Caleb had seen from her all day. Fair point. I'll have Rebecca pull a list of everyone who was on the 44th floor yesterday between 2 and 3 p.m. The list arrived 20 minutes later, 17 names. Vivian highlighted 5 who had been within visual range of the server room hallway during the critical window. We'll split them, Vivian decided. I'll take 3, you take 2. Keep the questions casual. Don't mention Cole specifically, just ask if they noticed anything unusual yesterday afternoon. You want me to conduct interviews? You're better at talking to regular employees than I am. When I ask questions, people assume I'm looking for someone to blame. You don't carry that weight. It was pragmatic reasoning, but Caleb appreciated the honesty. They spent the next 2 hours tracking down employees and asking careful questions. Most people remembered yesterday's chaos, but few had noticed anything specific about the server room area. Then Caleb talked to Jennifer Martinez, a database administrator who'd been working late to finish a migration project. "I was so focused on my screen I barely noticed anything," Jennifer said. "But yeah, I remember someone going into the server room around 2:15. I only noticed because he was walking fast, like he was in a hurry." Caleb kept his voice casual. "You remember what he looked like?" "Not really. Average height, dark jacket. I wasn't paying attention." She paused. "But I remember thinking it was weird that he used a physical key instead of his badge." "A key?" "Yeah, most people just scan their badges to open the server room door. But this guy used an actual key. Old school. Made me wonder if his badge reader was broken or something." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. "You didn't report it?" "Why would I? Lots of senior staff have physical keys for backup access. I figured he was just having badge problems." After thanking Jennifer and promising to buy her coffee sometime, Caleb found Vivian in her office and relayed what he'd learned. "A physical key," Vivian repeated. "Those are only issued to department heads and security personnel. If Cole used a key instead of his badge, there'd be no electronic record of him entering the server room. But there'd be a record of who checked out that key from facilities management." They pulled the facilities logs. Sure enough, someone had checked out a server room master key at 1:45 p.m. on the day of the attack. The signature on the checkout form was barely legible, but the employee ID number was clear. Nathan Cole's employee ID. Vivian leaned back, expression triumphant. "We've got him. Is it enough? Combined with everything else?" "Yes." "It establishes opportunity, method, and attempted concealment." Cole deliberately avoided creating an electronic access record by using a physical key, which shows consciousness of guilt. Caleb felt something loosening in his chest. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or just exhaustion catching up with him all at once. What happens now? "Now I bring this to legal. They'll want to interview Cole formally, probably with lawyers present. We'll need to—" The office door burst open. Marcus Chen stood in the doorway, looking panicked. Behind him, Rebecca appeared, clearly having tried and failed to stop him. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem." Vivian's expression went ice cold. "What kind of problem, Mr. Chen?" "Nathan Cole, he's gone. He didn't show up for work this morning, and he's not answering his phone. I sent someone to his apartment. His neighbors say they saw him loading boxes into his car last night." Caleb stood. "He's running." "Which means he knows we're onto him," Vivian said quietly. Marcus looked between them, confused. "I don't understand. Why would Cole run? He wasn't the one who sabotaged." He stopped, finally processing what he was seeing. Caleb Foster in the CEO's office, clearly working with Vivian on something. "What's going on?" Vivian made a decision. "Mr. Chen, sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Over the next 30 minutes, Vivian walked Marcus through everything they'd discovered. To his credit, Marcus didn't try to defend the company's rushed investigation. He just looked sick, like a man realizing he'd helped destroy an innocent person's career. When Vivian finished, Marcus turned to Caleb. "I'm sorry. I should have pushed back harder, should have insisted on a real investigation before we terminated you." "Yeah," Caleb said flatly. "You should have." The silence was uncomfortable. Marcus broke it first. "What do you need from me?" "Access to Cole's workstation," Vivian said. "Before he wiped it. He might have left evidence behind." They went down to the 43rd floor together, drawing stares from employees who'd watched Caleb's humiliation yesterday, and now saw him walking beside the CEO like nothing had happened. Nathan Cole's desk was neat, organized, completely empty of personal items. The computer was still there, but when Marcus logged in using his supervisor credentials, they found the hard drive had been wiped. "He covered his tracks," Marcus said. "Not necessarily." Caleb studied the workstation. "Even when you wipe a drive, data fragments remain in slack space and deleted sectors. We can recover it, but we'll need forensic software." "How long will that take?" "Hours. Maybe days, depending on how thorough the wipe was." Vivian checked her watch. "We don't have days. If Cole is running, he might be planning something worse. Another attack to cover his tracks, or to destroy evidence remotely." Then we need to find him, Caleb said. The company doesn't have authority to track employees outside work hours, Marcus pointed out. We'd need law enforcement involved, which means going public with this entire mess. Vivian's frustration showed for the first time. The board will have my head if this turns into a media circus. Caleb thought about Nathan's email from last night, the friendly offer to be a reference, the tone that had felt just slightly wrong. What if we don't need to find him? What if we make him come to us? Both Vivian and Marcus looked at him. Cole reached out to me yesterday, tried to establish that we were on good terms. He's nervous about something, maybe guilty conscience, maybe just covering his bases. Either way, he's paying attention to what I do next. So we use you as bait, Vivian said slowly. We make him think I'm a threat, force him to make a mistake. Marcus shook his head. That's dangerous. If Cole sabotaged the company's infrastructure, who knows what else he's capable of? Marcus is right, Vivian said. We can't risk your safety. Caleb thought about Sophie, waiting for him at Mrs. Chen's apartment. Thought about the rent due in 10 days and the future that had been stolen from both of them. He already destroyed my career, took away my ability to provide for my daughter, made me look like a criminal in front of everyone I've worked with for 4 years. Caleb met Vivian's eyes. I'm not scared of Nathan Cole. I'm angry, and I want him to face what he did. Vivian studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, but we do this carefully, with backup and safeguards. They spent the next hour planning. Caleb would send Nathan an email, friendly, casual, mentioning that he was meeting with lawyers about possible wrongful termination suits. The message would be designed to make Nathan panic, to make him think Caleb was about to expose everything. Then they'd wait. At 5:30, Caleb sent the email from his personal account. The message was short, deliberately vague, designed to provoke anxiety without being overtly threatening. Then they waited. 30 minutes later, Nathan responded. The email was longer than his previous message, more rambling. He talked about how unfair the whole situation was, how Caleb deserved better, how he hoped everything worked out. But buried in the middle was a sentence that made Caleb's skin crawl. Maybe we should meet up and talk about what really happened that day. I might know some things that could help your case. He's trying to gauge how much we know, Vivian said, reading over Caleb's shoulder. Or he's planning to shut me up permanently. Which is why you're not meeting him alone. Vivian picked up her phone. I'm calling building security. We'll arrange a meeting in a controlled environment with armed personnel nearby. But before she could dial, Caleb's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. This is Caleb. Caleb, it's Nathan. The voice was friendly, almost cheerful. Got your email. Listen, I know you're going through hell right now. I want to help. Can we meet tonight, somewhere private where we can talk freely? Caleb glanced at Vivian, who nodded. Sure. Where? You know the parking garage on Wabash, 3rd level, 8 o'clock. Just you and me, okay? I don't want this getting back to the company. Why should I trust you? Nathan's laugh sounded forced. Because we're both victims here, man. They screwed you over and I'm trying to help. But if you don't want my information, that's cool. I'll just keep my mouth shut. The line went dead. Vivian was already texting security. We're setting up a perimeter, plainclothes officers in the garage, cameras covering every angle. You'll wear a wire. What if he searches me? Then we'll have audio of him admitting to the attack in order to explain why he's searching you. Either way, we get what we need. Marcus looked uncomfortable. This feels like something the police should handle. We don't have time for official channels, Vivian said. Cole is running. If we lose him now, we might never get another chance. At 6:30, Caleb left Axion Sphere's building and drove to pick up Sophie from Mrs. Chen's apartment. She was covered in flour from cookie making and looked happier than she'd been in days. Did you fix the problem? She asked as they walked back upstairs. Working on it, baby. Getting close. At home, he made her dinner, mac and cheese from a box, the only thing she'd eat without complaining, and tried not to think about what he was about to do. Tried not to imagine all the ways tonight could go wrong. At 7:15, Mrs. Chen knocked on their door. I heard you might need a sitter tonight. Caleb blinked. How did you... Ms. Sinclair called me. Said you had important business to handle, and she didn't want you worrying about Sophie. Of course, Vivian had thought of that. She seemed to think of everything. You don't have to... Don't be silly. Sophie and I are going to watch a movie and eat cookies. You go do what you need to do. Mrs. Chen's expression turned serious. And be careful. At 7:45, Caleb arrived at the Wabash parking garage. The structure was old, poorly lit, the kind of place that felt vaguely threatening even in daylight. At night, it was worse. He parked on the second level and took the stairs up to 3. Vivian's security team had texted him locations. 2 officers in a sedan near the south entrance, 1 in the stairwell, another posing as a homeless person in the corner. The wire taped to his chest felt obvious, like everyone could see it through his jacket. At 8 o'clock exactly, headlights swept across the 3rd level. Nathan Cole's silver Mazda pulled into a spot 30 feet from where Caleb stood. Nathan got out slowly, looking around the empty garage. He was dressed casually, jeans and a jacket, hands in his pockets. "Caleb, thanks for coming. You said you had information." "I do, but first, I need to know, are you wearing a wire?" Caleb's heart hammered. "What? No." "Mind if I check?" This was it, the moment where everything could fall apart. But then Nathan smiled. "I'm kidding, man. Relax. I'm here to help you." He walked closer, and Caleb could see the strain around his eyes. Nathan was scared, trying to hide it, but scared. "So talk," Caleb said. "What do you know?" Nathan glanced around again, then lowered his voice. "I know you didn't sabotage the system. I know someone framed you. And I think I know who." "Who?" "Marcus Chen." Caleb stared at him. "My supervisor? Why would Marcus think about it? He's been passed over for promotion 3 times. He resents you because you're better at the job than he is. He had access to everything he'd need to pull this off." It was a good lie, plausible enough to create doubt. But Caleb had seen the evidence, had watched Nathan's digital trail lead directly to the attack. "That's an interesting theory," Caleb said carefully. "Got any proof?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it. I just need you to trust me." Nathan stepped closer. "Look, I know this is hard, but if you start making noise about wrongful termination, about lawyers and lawsuits, you're going to make things worse for yourself. The company will destroy you. They have resources you can't imagine." "So what are you suggesting?" "Take the settlement they're offering. Walk away quietly. Let me handle the investigation. I'll find the truth and make sure it comes out, but you need to back off." There it was. The real reason for this meeting. Nathan wanted Caleb silent and gone. "And if I don't back off," Nathan's expression hardened, "then I can't help you, and things might get complicated." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice, from someone who's trying to protect you." Caleb let the silence stretch out. Then he said, "I know it was you, Nathan." Nathan went very still. "What?" "You checked out the physical key to the server room at 1:45 p.m. You accessed Terminal 7B at 2:16 p.m. You executed the attack using my credentials that you'd stolen weeks earlier when you were exploiting vulnerabilities in the credential management system." Nathan's face drained of color. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can. Security footage, access logs. Jennifer Martinez saw you enter the server room with a physical key. Your workstation history shows months of preparation." Caleb took a step forward. "Why did you do it? Was it just to get rid of me, or was there something else?" For a long moment, Nathan just stood there. Then something in him crumbled. "You have no idea what it's like," he said quietly. "Watching you succeed so easily. Never struggling, never doubting yourself. You made it look effortless while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition." "So you destroyed my life out of jealousy?" "I destroyed the competition. That's how this world works, Caleb. You were in my way." "And the company? The millions in damage?" Nathan shrugged. "Collateral damage. I was going to fix it after you were gone. Make myself look like the hero. Get the promotion I deserved." Caleb felt sick. "You're insane." "I'm ambitious. There's a difference." Nathan's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Instantly, the parking garage flooded with light. Car doors opened. Security officers appeared from 3 directions, weapons drawn. "Nathan Cole, don't move!" Nathan froze, hand halfway to his pocket. For a second, Caleb thought he might run, but then he just laughed, bitter and defeated. "I should have just left town." "Yeah," Caleb said. "You should have." They arrested Nathan in the parking garage, read him his rights while Caleb stood back and watched. Vivian appeared from the stairwell, flanked by 2 lawyers and a police detective who'd apparently been read in on the situation. "Good work," she said to Caleb. "The wire captured everything." Nathan glared at him as security led him away. "You're still going to lose, Foster. Even if they clear you, your reputation is destroyed. No one's going to hire the guy who got framed for sabotage." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but at least I'll be able to look my daughter in the eye and tell her I did the right thing." Nathan had no response to that. After the police took Nathan away and the lawyers finished their initial statements, Vivian walked Caleb back to his car. "Thank you," Caleb said, "for believing me, for actually looking at the evidence instead of taking the easy answer. Don't thank me yet. We still have to deal with the board, the media fallout, the internal investigation into how this happened." Vivian leaned against his car, looking tired for the first time since he'd met her. "This is going to get messy before it gets better." "I'm used to messy," she smiled slightly. "I'm beginning to see that." They stood there in the cold February night, 2 people who'd been strangers 48 hours ago and were now bound together by truth and consequences. "What happens next?" Caleb asked. "Next we rebuild. Your reputation, your career, the company's security protocols, all of it." Vivian straightened. "Come to my office Monday morning. We have work to do." Caleb drove home through empty Chicago streets with his hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The adrenaline from confronting Nathan was wearing off, replaced by exhaustion so heavy it felt physical. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every block stretched longer than it should. When he finally pulled into his building's parking lot, he sat in the car for a full minute, just breathing, trying to process what had just happened. Nathan's confession, the arrest, Vivian's quiet acknowledgement that this was only the beginning of fixing the mess. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock. "Sophie fell asleep on my couch about an hour ago. Didn't want to move her." Inside Mrs. Chen's apartment, which smelled like vanilla and old books, Sophie was curled up under a knitted blanket with her stuffed bear tucked under her chin. She looked impossibly small, impossibly peaceful. "Thank you," Caleb said, "for everything." "That's what neighbors do." Mrs. Chen handed him a plastic container. "Leftover soup. You both need to eat real food." Caleb carried Sophie upstairs, her head heavy against his shoulder. She stirred slightly when he laid her in bed but didn't wake. He pulled the blanket up to her chin, moved her bear closer, and just stood there watching her breathe. This was what mattered. Not Axionsphere, not his career, not his reputation. Just this small person who trusted him completely and deserved a father who wouldn't let her down. He ate Mrs. Chen's soup standing at the kitchen counter, too tired to sit, too hungry to wait. Then he collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally dragged him under. Saturday morning arrived with Sophie jumping on his bed at 7:30. "Daddy, you slept in your clothes." Caleb groaned and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Vivian's office, 2 from Marcus Chen, and 17 emails he didn't have the energy to read yet. "Rough night, baby." "Did you fix the problem?" "Most of it, yeah." "Can we get hot chocolate now?" The request made him smile despite everything. Sophie had the attention span of a goldfish for most things, but she never forgot a promise. "Yeah, we can get hot chocolate." They walked to the cafe 2 blocks away, the one with oversized marshmallows and windows that fogged up from the steam inside. The Saturday morning crowd was light. Caleb ordered Sophie's hot chocolate and a coffee for himself that tasted like actual coffee instead of burned water. Sophie sat across from him in the booth, carefully fishing marshmallows out of her cup with a spoon, and for 20 minutes the world felt almost normal. Then his phone rang. Vivian. "Foster, we have a situation. Can you come to the office?" Caleb glanced at Sophie, who was now drawing on a napkin with the crayon the cafe kept in a jar by the register. "It's Saturday?" "I'm aware. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. They want a complete explanation of what happened, and they want both of us there to deliver it." "Both of us?" "You're the victim in this, Caleb. Your testimony carries weight, and frankly, I need you there to corroborate everything we found." He thought about telling her no, about taking the weekend to just exist without corporate drama. But Vivian had believed him when no one else did, had risked her own reputation to find the truth. "Give me an hour." Mrs. Chen agreed to watch Sophie again, though she gave Caleb a look that suggested he owed her an explanation eventually. He He drove back to Axionsphere's building, which looked strange and empty on a weekend. The lobby was quiet except for a single security guard who checked his ID with significantly less suspicion than before. Vivian's office was exactly as he'd left it Friday night, except now there were multiple whiteboards covered in notes and timelines. She was standing in front of one, marker in hand, hair pulled back in a messy knot that made her look younger and somehow more human. "Coffee?" She gestured to a pot on the side table. "Already had one." "Have another. We're going to be here a while." She walked him through the board's concerns. Nathan's arrest had leaked to the media overnight. The Chicago Tribune was running a story about corporate sabotage and security failures. Axionsphere's stock had dropped 3% in after-hours trading. Shareholders were demanding answers. "They want to know how this happened," Vivian said. "More specifically, they want to know why our security protocols failed so catastrophically that one engineer could bring down the entire financial network." "That's not a one-hour conversation." "No, it's not," she capped the marker. "Which is why I'm proposing a complete overhaul of our infrastructure security. New protocols, new oversight, independent audits, and I want you to lead it." Caleb stared at her. "Lead what?" "The security overhaul. You'd be promoted to Director of Infrastructure Security, full authority to rebuild the systems, hire your own team, implement whatever changes you think are necessary. I was fired 3 days ago. And now you're being unfired with a promotion and a significant raise, assuming you want it." Caleb sat down heavily in the chair across from her desk. "Why me?" "Because you understand the systems better than anyone. Because you've proven you prioritize truth over convenience. And because I trust you." Vivian's expression was serious. "I've spent years building this company, Caleb. I'm not going to watch it fall apart because of inadequate security and people more interested in covering their asses than fixing problems. What about the board? Will they approve this?" "They'll approve whatever I recommend. The question is whether you'll accept." It was the kind of opportunity people spent careers working toward. Director-level position. Real authority. Enough salary to move Sophie out of their cramped apartment to stop worrying about every grocery bill. But it also meant staying at Axionsphere, working alongside people who'd watched him get escorted out like a criminal. Rebuilding trust with colleagues who'd believed the worst about him without question. "I need to think about it," Caleb said. Vivian nodded. "Fair. But I need an answer by Monday morning." They spent the rest of Saturday preparing for the board meeting. Vivian drilled him on timeline questions, potential objections, technical details that board members might not understand. She was ruthlessly thorough, catching inconsistencies in his explanations, forcing him to clarify points he thought were obvious. "They're going to try to blame you somehow," she said. "Suggest you should have noticed the vulnerabilities earlier, or that your security practices were lax. You need to be ready for that." "My security practices were fine." "I know. But they'll be looking for someone to blame besides themselves. Be ready to defend every decision you made." At 4 o'clock, Caleb's phone rang. Sophie, calling from Mrs. Chen's apartment using the old landline. "Daddy? When are you coming home?" "Soon, baby. Another hour, maybe." "You said an hour before." "I know, I'm sorry. The work is taking longer than I thought." "Is it important?" Caleb looked at Vivian, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Yeah, it's important." "Okay. Mrs. Chen is teaching me to knit. I'm making something ugly." Despite everything, he laughed. "I'm sure it's beautiful." "No, it's definitely ugly, but she says that's okay because it's my first try." After hanging up, Caleb found Vivian still watching him. "You should go," she said. "We've covered enough for today." "You sure?" "Your daughter needs you more than I do right now." It was the most personal thing she'd said to him since they'd met. A recognition that life existed outside corporate crises and board meetings. "Thank you," Caleb said. "For all of this. Not just the investigation, the second chance." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "Don't thank me yet. Monday is going to be brutal." She wasn't wrong. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray Chicago weather that made everything feel oppressive. Caleb dropped Sophie at school, watched her run toward her classroom without looking back, then drove to Axionsphere with a knot in his stomach. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the top-floor conference room, the one with panoramic windows and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Caleb arrived 15 minutes early and found Vivian already there, wearing a black suit that made her look like she was preparing for war. "Ready?" she asked. "No." "Good. Neither am I." The board members arrived in a cluster, 7 of them, all older white men except for one woman in her 60s who looked like she could cut steel with her stare. They barely acknowledged Caleb's presence, treating him like furniture. Gerald Reeves, the head of legal who'd been present during Caleb's termination, gave him a look that suggested he still wasn't entirely convinced of Caleb's innocence. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Robert Henshaw, called the meeting to order with the kind of authoritative tone that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "Ms. Sinclair, you requested this meeting to address last week's security incident. We're all very interested to hear your explanation for how this company's infrastructure was compromised by a single employee." Vivian stood, connecting her laptop to the room's display system. "Before we begin, I want to clarify something. The security breach wasn't committed by a single employee. It was committed by Nathan Cole, who then framed Caleb Foster to avoid detection. Mr. Foster is here as a witness, not as a defendant." Robert's expression didn't change. "We're aware of the arrest. What we want to understand is how this was allowed to happen in the first place." For the next hour, Vivian walked them through everything. Nathan's exploitation of security vulnerabilities, the credential theft, the framing, the investigation that revealed the truth. She presented evidence methodically, answering questions with the kind of precision that left no room for argument. Caleb watched the board members' faces shift from skepticism to concern to something that looked almost like panic. They were realizing how close they'd come to destroying an innocent employee while letting the real saboteur escape. Finally, Robert turned to Caleb. "Mr. Foster, you were terminated based on preliminary evidence that later proved false. Do you intend to pursue legal action against this company?" Every eye in the room locked on him. This was the question they'd all been waiting for, the one that determined whether Axion Sphere faced a costly lawsuit and public relations nightmare. Caleb thought about the humiliation of being escorted out, the fear in Sophie's eyes, the 3 days he'd spent thinking his life was over. "That depends," he said carefully. "On what? On whether this company is willing to acknowledge what happened publicly. Not just internally. I want a formal statement clearing my name, sent to every employee and posted on the company website. I want confirmation that Nathan Cole was solely responsible for the attack, and I want assurance that the security failures that made this possible will be fixed." Robert exchanged glances with the other board members. "Those are reasonable requests. Ms. Sinclair has already proposed a comprehensive security overhaul." "Then no. I don't intend to sue." Caleb leaned forward. "But I'm not interested in quiet settlements or non-disclosure agreements. What happened to me could happen to anyone in this company. If we're going to fix it, we fix it honestly." The board member with the steel stare, her nameplate read Patricia something, spoke for the first time. "Ms. Sinclair has recommended you to lead the security overhaul. That's an unusual choice given the circumstances." "Is it?" Caleb met her eyes. "I understand these systems better than most people in this company. I've seen firsthand what happens when security protocols fail, and I have no interest in covering up problems to make quarterly reports look good." Patricia almost smiled. "Fair point." The meeting continued for another hour, diving into technical details and implementation timelines. Vivian fielded most of the questions, but occasionally she'd defer to Caleb, letting him explain the specific vulnerabilities that Nathan had exploited. He noticed something during those exchanges. The board members listened to him. Actually listened, not just waited for him to stop talking. His technical expertise carried weight in a way it never had before. Being a victim had accidentally given him authority. Finally, Robert called for a vote on Vivian's proposed security overhaul and Caleb's appointment as Director of Infrastructure Security. The vote was unanimous. "Mr. Foster, congratulations. We'll have HR draw up the necessary paperwork." Robert stood, signaling the meeting was over. "And Mr. Foster, I apologize for what you went through last week. It shouldn't have happened." It wasn't enough. Nothing could erase those 3 days of hell, but it was something. After the board members filed out, Caleb found himself alone with Vivian in the conference room. "That went better than expected," she said. "Did you think they'd vote no? I thought there was a chance they'd try to minimize the whole thing. Offer you a settlement to go away quietly. Vivian started packing up her laptop. I'm glad they didn't. This company needs someone who won't compromise on security. I haven't officially accepted yet. She paused. Are you having second thoughts? Caleb walked to the windows, looking out at Chicago spread below. From up here, the city looked manageable, orderly, nothing like the messy reality of actual life. 3 days ago, I thought my career was over. Thought I'd never work in tech again. Now I'm being offered a director position and enough money to actually breathe. He turned back to face her. It feels too easy. Easy? Vivian's laugh was sharp. Caleb, you were publicly humiliated, investigated by the CEO personally, and used yourself as bait to catch a saboteur. Nothing about this has been easy. You know what I mean. The board just voted to give me everything I asked for without pushback. That doesn't happen in corporate America. It happens when the alternative is a lawsuit that would cost 10 times as much and destroy the company's reputation. Vivian's expression turned serious. Make no mistake. They're not doing this because they care about you. They're doing it because it's the cheapest way to make this problem disappear. That's cynical. That's realistic. She closed her laptop case. But here's the thing. Their motivations don't matter. What matters is that you have an opportunity to actually fix things, to build security infrastructure that protects people instead of just protecting profits. You can accept that opportunity knowing it's tainted, or you can walk away on principle. Either choice is valid. Caleb thought about Sophie, about the bills piling up, about the future he'd thought was gone forever. Thought about the other engineers at Sphere who could end up like him if the security failures weren't fixed. I'll take the position, he said, but on one condition. What condition? You stay involved, not micromanaging, but as a check. Someone who will push back if I start making the same mistakes the company made before. Vivian considered this. You're asking me to be your accountability partner. I'm asking you to be someone who gives a damn about doing things right. She extended her hand. Deal. They shook on it, a formal gesture that felt strangely important. The rest of Monday was a blur of meetings with HR, signing paperwork, discussing salary and benefits that made Caleb's head spin. By the time he left Sphere that evening, he had a new title, a new office, and a mandate to rebuild the company's entire security infrastructure from the ground up. He picked Sophie up from after-school care, and she immediately noticed something different. You look happy. I got my job back, a better one. Does that mean we're not poor anymore? The question stabbed him in the chest. He'd tried so hard to shield her from their financial stress, but 6-year-olds noticed everything. We were never poor, baby, just careful with money. Okay, can we still be careful? Because I like our apartment. I don't want to move. Caleb pulled her into a hug. We're not moving unless you want to. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and actually looked at the salary offer. It was nearly double what he'd been making before. Enough to pay off the past due electric bill. Enough to buy Sophie new winter boots without checking his account balance first. Enough to stop living 3 days away from financial disaster. He thought about calling his sister in California, the one who'd offered to let him move in after the termination. Thought about calling his college roommate who'd been texting supportive messages all week. Thought about telling someone that everything had somehow worked out. Instead, he just sat in the quiet kitchen and let himself feel relief. Tuesday morning, Caleb started his new position. HR had assigned him an office on the 45th floor, one level above where he used to work. The space was modest by executive standards, but enormous compared to his old cubicle. Windows on 2 walls, a desk that wasn't held together with duct tape, a door that actually closed. Marcus Chen appeared in the doorway around 10 o'clock, looking uncomfortable. Got a minute? Caleb gestured to one of the chairs. What's up? Marcus sat down, not meeting his eyes. I wanted to apologize. Properly. Not the corporate sorry this happened to you bullshit, but actual recognition that I failed you. Okay. When the system crashed, I assumed you were guilty because it was easier than questioning the evidence. I went along with the termination because I didn't want to make waves, didn't want to look like I couldn't control my team. Marcus finally looked at him. I chose my career over your life. That was wrong. Caleb studied his former supervisor. Marcus looked older than he had last week, like the guilt was physically aging him. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. It was wrong. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but for what it's worth, I'm glad Vivian actually investigated. And I'm glad you're back. Are you? Because now you're reporting to me instead of the other way around. Marcus's smile was bitter. I deserve that. And yeah, it's awkward as hell. But it's better than knowing I helped destroy an innocent man's career. After Marcus left, Caleb spent an hour staring at his computer screen, trying to figure out where to even start with the security overhaul. The scope was massive. Credential management systems, access controls, monitoring protocols, training programs. Each piece was a month-long project on its own. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. Meeting in my office, 30 minutes. When he arrived, he found her office had been transformed into what looked like a war room. More whiteboards, more timelines, and 3 people he didn't recognize sitting around her conference table. Caleb, meet your new team, Vivian said. Sarah Okonkwo, penetration testing specialist. David Park, security architecture. And Monica Reeves, no relation to Gerald, compliance and audit. The 3 stood and shook his hand, and Caleb tried not to show how overwhelmed he felt. He'd never managed a team before, had certainly never built one from scratch. They're all contractors I've worked with on previous projects, Vivian explained. Best in their fields. I brought them in to help you build the new infrastructure. Sarah, a woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and sharp eyes, spoke first. We've been reviewing the preliminary reports on the coal incident. Honestly, it's a miracle this didn't happen sooner. Your credential management system had vulnerabilities going back at least 2 years. I know, Caleb said. I flagged some of them in quarterly reports. And they were ignored, David added. He was younger, maybe late 20s, with the kind of energy that suggested he'd consumed significant caffeine. Classic corporate trade-off. Security costs money and slows down deployment. Revenue generation wins every time. Monica, who looked like someone's stern librarian aunt, adjusted her glasses. Which is why we need buy-in from the top. Not just Vivian, but the entire C-suite. If we're going to rebuild these systems properly, we need executive commitment that security isn't negotiable. Vivian nodded. Already arranged, starting next month, security metrics will be part of every executive's performance review. If their department fails an audit, it impacts their bonus. That'll piss people off, Caleb said. Good. Let them be pissed. Better than being sabotaged. They spent the next 3 hours mapping out the overhaul. Sarah would identify vulnerabilities and test defenses. David would design the new architecture. Monica would ensure everything met compliance standards. And Caleb would coordinate it all while managing relationships with the existing infrastructure team. It was ambitious, probably too ambitious, the kind of project that could easily collapse under its own complexity. But for the first time since the whole nightmare started, Caleb felt something that might have been hope. The week blurred into a rhythm. Early mornings dropping Sophie at school. Long days at Axionsphere coordinating with his new team. Evenings picking Sophie up and trying to be present for homework and dinner, despite his brain still spinning with security protocols. On Thursday, the company-wide email went out. It was short, direct, and signed by both Vivian and Robert Henshaw. It acknowledged the security breach, cleared Caleb's name publicly, and announced Nathan Cole's arrest. It didn't go into technical details, but it was honest enough to feel genuine. Within an hour, Caleb's inbox flooded with messages. Some were apologies from coworkers who'd assumed his guilt. Some were congratulations on his promotion. A few were from people he barely knew, offering vague support that felt more like social obligation than actual concern. One email stood out. From Jennifer Martinez, the database administrator who'd noticed Nathan entering the server room. Glad the truth came out. Let me know if you need help with the security overhaul. We're all rooting for you. It was simple, genuine, and somehow meant more than all the executive apologies combined. That evening, Caleb took Sophie out for dinner at a real restaurant, not just fast food. She ordered chicken fingers and spent the entire meal telling him about a science project involving plants and sunlight that he only half understood. Mrs. Peterson says I have to draw a diagram, Sophie explained. But I'm not good at diagrams. I'm better at cats. Then draw cats doing science. She considered this seriously. Can cats do science? Sure, science cats. Why not? Sophie giggled, the sound bright and uncomplicated. For those few minutes, sitting in a booth at a family restaurant watching his daughter laugh at the idea of science cats, Caleb felt something close to normal. On Friday afternoon, Vivian called him to her office again. The press is requesting interviews, she said. They want the human interest angle. Wrongfully accused employee gets vindicated and promoted. It's a good story. I don't want to do interviews. I figured. But you should know the option exists. Some people would use this opportunity to build their professional profile. Caleb shook his head. I'm not interested in being a victim-turned-success story. I just want to do the work. Vivian's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. That's what I told them you'd say. You already turned them down for me? I made an educated guess. She pulled up something on her tablet. There's one more thing we need to discuss. Nathan Cole's preliminary hearing is next week. The prosecutor wants you to testify about the investigation, the frame job, everything. Caleb's stomach tightened. I have to face him again? Not if you don't want to. The wire recording from the parking garage is strong evidence, but your testimony would strengthen the case significantly. What if I say no? Then you say no. You don't owe the justice system anything, Caleb. You've already given enough. He thought about Nathan's face in the parking garage, the casual way he'd admitted to destroying Caleb's life out of jealousy and ambition. Thought about other people Nathan might target if he somehow got away with this. I'll testify, Caleb said, but only if Sophie doesn't have to be involved. She's been through enough. Agreed. I'll let the prosecutor know. Walking back to his office, Caleb passed the 43rd floor and paused. The engineering department looked the same as always. People at their workstations, focused on screens, probably dealing with the same routine problems that had filled his days before everything exploded. Some of them glanced up as he passed. A few nodded. Others looked away quickly, still uncomfortable with what had happened. Caleb didn't blame them. Comfort was easier than confrontation. Silence was safer than taking sides. He understood that better than most. That weekend, Caleb did something he hadn't done in months. He took Sophie to the Lincoln Park Zoo, just the two of them, with no work thoughts allowed. They looked at penguins and lions and spent 20 minutes watching monkeys who seemed to be having more fun than any creature had a right to. Sophie held his hand the entire time, asking questions about every animal, inventing stories about their lives and personalities. That penguin is named Jeffrey, she announced, and he's sad because his best friend moved to a different zoo. How do you know that? Look at his face. He's definitely sad about something. Caleb looked at the penguin, which appeared completely indifferent to human interpretation of its emotional state. Maybe Jeffrey's just thinking about fish. No, definitely friend problems. On the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from walking and inventing penguin narratives. Caleb glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. This was what he'd fought for. Not the job, not the salary, not even his reputation. Just the ability to give his daughter a normal childhood, one where she didn't have to worry about adult problems or notice when her father was drowning. Monday morning brought the beginning of actual implementation. Sarah's security audit revealed 17 critical vulnerabilities, 38 high-priority concerns, and more than 100 minor issues that individually seemed harmless but collectively created significant risk. This is worse than I thought, Sarah said, presenting her findings to Caleb and Vivian. Your entire authentication system is held together with digital duct tape. I could breach it in under an hour with basic tools. David pulled up his proposed architecture redesign. We need to rebuild from the foundation up. New credential management, multi-factor authentication for all privileged access, automated monitoring with real-time alerts. We're talking minimum 6 months to implement properly. The board approved a 4-month timeline, Vivian said. Then the board doesn't understand infrastructure security. They understand shareholder value and quarterly earnings. We need to work within their constraints. David and Sarah exchanged glances, the kind that suggested they'd dealt with unrealistic executive timelines before. We can compress the schedule, Monica said, but it increases risk. Every shortcut we take is a potential vulnerability. Caleb leaned back, thinking, what if we do it in phases? Implement the critical security controls first, then roll out the comprehensive rebuild in stages. That way we're protected while we work. Sarah considered this. It's not ideal, but it's better than rushing everything and hoping we didn't miss something crucial. They spent the rest of the day mapping out a phased implementation plan that balanced security needs with corporate timeline pressures. It wasn't perfect, but it was achievable. That night, Caleb stayed late reviewing the technical specifications, making sure he understood every component. Around 8 o'clock, Vivian appeared in his doorway. "You're still here." Had to finish the Phase 1 security spec. Needed to be right the first time. "You know you don't have to prove yourself anymore, right? The board already approved your position." Caleb looked up from his screen. "This isn't about proving myself. It's about not wanting anyone else to go through what I went through. If we're going to fix this, we fix it right." Vivian leaned against the doorframe. "You remind me of my brother. Before everything fell apart, he used to care about doing things right too." It was the first time she'd mentioned her brother since that first conversation. Caleb waited, sensing there was more. "He got out of prison 8 months ago," Vivian continued quietly. "Conviction overturned, full exoneration, but he never recovered. Couldn't get hired anywhere. His wife had left. His kids barely spoke to him. Last I heard, he was working retail in Cleveland, trying to rebuild a life from nothing. I'm sorry. The truth came out, but it was too late to matter. That's what haunts me." Vivian's expression was distant. "Justice works on different timelines than human lives. Sometimes, by the time the system admits it was wrong, there's nothing left to salvage. Is that why you push so hard to investigate?" "That's why I couldn't let another innocent person get destroyed on my watch." She pushed off the doorframe. "Go home, Caleb. Spend time with your daughter. The security specs will still be here tomorrow." He packed up his laptop and headed home, thinking about Vivian's brother, about timelines and justice, and all the ways systems failed people while claiming to protect them. Sophie was already asleep when he got home, but she'd left a new drawing on the kitchen table. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Above them, in her careful handwriting, "Daddy's new job. We are happy." Caleb stood in the quiet kitchen, holding his daughter's drawing, and let himself believe that maybe things really would be okay. The courthouse smelled like old wood and anxiety. Caleb sat on a bench in the hallway outside the courtroom, watching lawyers in expensive suits move past with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested they billed by the minute. Vivian sat beside him, scrolling through emails on her phone, occasionally muttering about something the board had sent her. Nathan Cole's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was currently 9:45, and Caleb's stomach had been doing gymnastics since he woke up. "You okay?" Vivian asked without looking up from her phone. "Fine. You're a terrible liar." "Yeah, well, I'm working on it." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Angela Park, emerged from the courtroom and walked over to them. She was younger than Caleb expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of intensity that suggested she took her job personally. "Mr. Foster, we're going to call you second, right after the detective who arrested Cole. Your testimony should take about 30 minutes. Just answer the questions honestly and don't elaborate beyond what's asked. What if his lawyer tries to make me look unreliable? Then I'll object. But honestly, you're not the defendant here. You're a victim and a witness. The defense won't go after you too hard without looking like they're blaming the victim, which plays badly with judges." That was supposed to be reassuring. It wasn't. Angela disappeared back into the courtroom. Vivian finally put her phone away and looked at him directly. "If you want to leave, we can leave. I'll make an excuse to Angela. You don't owe anyone this." "I know. But you're going to do it anyway." "Yeah." "Why?" Caleb thought about it. "Because Nathan made choices that destroyed my life. And if I don't stand up and say what happened, he might convince people those choices weren't really his fault, that it was a mistake or a misunderstanding or something that could happen to anyone under pressure. You want him held accountable. I want the truth on record." At 10 o'clock, they were called into the courtroom. The space was smaller than Caleb expected from TV shows, less dramatic. Wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, an American flag in the corner that looked like it had seen better days. Nathan sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a man in his 50s who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. Nathan was wearing a suit Caleb had never seen before, probably chosen to make him look professional and harmless. His expression was carefully neutral, but when Caleb walked past, their eyes met for a second. Nathan looked away first. The detective testified first, walking through the arrest, the confession recorded on Caleb's wire, the evidence recovered from Nathan's apartment when they executed a search warrant, standard procedure, delivered in the flat tone of someone who'd testified hundreds of times before. Then Angela called Caleb to the stand. The oath felt surreal. Caleb put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, wondering what happened if you didn't believe in religious oaths, but still meant to be honest. Angela started with basic questions. His employment history at AxionSphere, his role as senior systems engineer, his relationship with Nathan, which had been professionally cordial but never personal. Can you describe what happened on February 12th? Caleb walked through the day again. The snowstorm, bringing Sophie to work, the system crash, the accusations, everything he'd already explained to Vivian, to the board, to Angela during their prep session. And when you were initially accused, did you have any idea who might have actually committed the sabotage? Not immediately, but I knew it wasn't me, which meant someone had stolen my credentials. That narrowed it down to people with the technical skills to pull it off. How did you eventually identify Nathan Cole as the perpetrator? Caleb explained the investigation. Nathan's access to vulnerability assessments, his questions about server protocols, the physical key checkout, the pattern of behavior that only made sense if Nathan was planning something. Angela moved on to the parking garage meeting, playing the audio recording for the courtroom. Hearing Nathan's voice again, casual and friendly before shifting to threat, made Caleb's skin crawl. After Mr. Cole's arrest, did AxionSphere conduct additional investigation into the sabotage? Yes. They brought in external forensics experts who confirmed that Nathan had created backdoors in the credential management system weeks before the attack. He'd been planning it for at least a month. Nathan's lawyer stood. Objection. The witness is not a forensics expert and cannot testify to technical analysis he didn't personally conduct. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, nodded. Sustained. Mr. Foster, stick to what you personally witnessed or experienced. Angela adjusted her approach. Did you personally review the forensics report? Yes. And based on your expertise as a senior systems engineer with 4 years of experience at AxionSphere, did the findings in that report appear technically sound? Yes. The methodology was solid, and the conclusions were consistent with the evidence. They went back and forth for another 15 minutes. Angela walking Caleb through details, Nathan's lawyer objecting periodically but never aggressively cross-examining. Finally, the judge dismissed Caleb from the stand. Walking back to the gallery, Caleb felt Nathan watching him. This time he didn't look away. Just met Nathan's eyes and held them until Nathan turned back to his lawyer, something defeated in his posture. The hearing continued for another hour with technical witnesses and evidence presentation. Finally, the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial and denied Nathan's request for bail, citing flight risk. Nathan was led out in handcuffs, and Caleb felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, Vivian checked her phone and swore quietly. What's wrong? The board wants an emergency meeting this afternoon. Apparently, one of our major clients is threatening to pull their contract because of the security breach. Which client? Meridian Financial. They handle about 15% of our annual revenue. Caleb did the math in his head. That was a lot of money. Can they actually walk away? They can. And if they do, others might follow. Confidence is everything in this industry. Vivian flagged down a taxi. I need you at that meeting. The board is going to want assurance that the security overhaul is on track. I'm not ready to present to Meridian executives. Neither am I, but we don't get to choose our timeline. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock in AxionSphere's largest conference room, the one usually reserved for investor presentations and merger negotiations. Caleb spent the 90 minutes beforehand frantically reviewing the security implementation plan, trying to anticipate every possible question. Sarah called him at 1:30. I heard about the Meridian situation. Do you need backup for the meeting? Can you get here in 30 minutes? I'm already in the lobby. Sarah arrived in his office 10 minutes later, carrying her laptop and a coffee that smelled expensive. Together, they refined the presentation, stripping out technical jargon and focusing on concrete improvements that would matter to a financial services company. They don't care about our architecture redesign, Sarah said. They care about whether their data is safe. Hit them with multi-factor authentication, automated threat detection, and third-party audit commitments. That's what moves the needle. At 2 o'clock, Caleb walked into the conference room to find 6 board members, Vivian, and 4 executives from Meridian Financial. The Meridian people looked like they'd come prepared for war. Suits that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. Expressions that suggested they'd already made up their minds and were just here as a courtesy. Robert Henshaw made introductions. This is Caleb Foster, our new Director of Infrastructure Security. He's leading the comprehensive security overhaul we discussed. The lead Meridian executive, a woman named Claire Dobson, barely glanced at Caleb. We're aware of Mr. Foster's recent promotion. We're less clear on whether that promotion was based on competence or corporate liability management. The room went silent. It was the kind of insult delivered with such professional courtesy that objecting to it would seem petty. Caleb felt every eye turn to him. This was a test, not of his technical knowledge, but of his ability to handle pressure without breaking. Fair question, he said evenly. 6 weeks ago, I was a senior engineer. Then someone framed me for sabotage. I got fired, investigated the real perpetrator, and ended up here. So yeah, the path to this position was unusual. But my technical competence isn't in question. The security failures that made the sabotage possible are. That's what I'm here to fix. Claire's expression didn't change. And how long will these fixes take? We're implementing critical controls in the next 30 days. Full infrastructure rebuild in 6 months. Sarah Okonkwo, our penetration testing specialist, has already identified and prioritized 17 critical vulnerabilities. We're addressing them in order of risk severity. I've read the preliminary report, one of Claire's colleagues said. Some of these vulnerabilities have existed for years. Why should we believe they'll actually be fixed now? Vivian started to respond, but Caleb jumped in first. Because I'm not interested in checking boxes to make audit reports look good. I'm interested in building systems that actually work. The old approach prioritized speed and cost over security. We're reversing that. Every major deployment now requires security review before launch. Every executive's performance metrics now include security compliance. And every quarter, we're publishing transparency reports showing our progress. Claire leaned back in her chair. Transparency reports are meaningless if they're written by the same company trying to prove it's trustworthy. Which is why we're bringing in independent third-party auditors. They'll verify our work and publish their findings directly to our major clients, including you. That got her attention. When? First audit completes in 90 days. Claire exchanged glances with her colleagues. The room's energy had shifted slightly, from hostile to merely skeptical. Miss Sinclair, Claire said, turning to Vivian, you're personally guaranteeing these commitments? I am. And if Axion Sphere fails to meet these timelines, then Meridian walks, and we accept responsibility for the failure. It was a massive commitment, the kind that could cost Vivian her job if things went wrong. Claire seemed to recognize that. We'll give you the 90 days, Claire said finally, but we're putting the contract renewal on hold pending the third-party audit results. If the audit shows inadequate progress, we're out. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. After the Meridian executives left, the board members filed out quietly, leaving just Caleb and Vivian in the conference room. That was risky, Vivian said, promising third-party audits without consulting me first. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was the right move. We need accountability, and external audits provide it. She rubbed her eyes. But now we actually have to deliver on everything you promised. Can we? We don't have a choice. They spent the rest of the afternoon in crisis mode, accelerating timelines and reallocating resources. Sarah, David, and Monica were pulled into emergency planning sessions. Every department head got emails demanding immediate cooperation with security reviews. By 6 o'clock, Caleb's head was pounding and his coffee had gone cold. His phone rang. Mrs. Chen. Caleb, I picked Sophie up from school like you asked, but she's running a fever. Nothing serious, but she's asking for you. Guilt hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on Meridian and board meetings that he'd forgotten Sophie had asked to stay home from school that morning because she felt weird. He'd assumed she was just tired and sent her anyway. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Vivian looked up from her laptop. Everything okay? Sophie's sick. I have to go. Go. We're done here anyway. Caleb grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, already texting Mrs. Chen that he was on his way. The drive home took forever, every red light feeling personal. When he finally got to Mrs. Chen's apartment, Sophie was curled up on the couch with a blanket, looking small and miserable. Hey, baby, I heard you're not feeling great. My head hurts, and my stomach feels funny. He felt her forehead, definitely warm, though not dangerously so. Let's get you home and into bed, okay? Mrs. Chen handed him a bottle of children's fever medication. I gave her 1 dose around 4. She can have another at 8 if she still needs it. Thank you for everything. That's what neighbors do. Back in their apartment, Caleb got Sophie into pajamas and settled in bed with her stuffed bear and a glass of water. He sat beside her, running his hand through her hair the way she liked. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "Are you going to get in trouble for leaving work early?" The question hurt more than it should have. She'd learned to worry about him, to see his job as something fragile that could disappear if he made mistakes. "No. My boss understands that you're more important than meetings." "Okay." She closed her eyes. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course." He sat there for 40 minutes, watching her breathe, feeling her forehead periodically to monitor the fever. When she finally fell asleep, he moved to the kitchen and made himself dinner from whatever was in the refrigerator. Eggs and toast, simple but functional. His phone buzzed with work emails, but he ignored them. Tonight, work could wait. Around 9 o'clock, Vivian texted. "How's Sophie?" "Fever, probably just a bug." "She'll be fine. Take tomorrow off if you need to." "I might. Depends how she feels in the morning." There was a pause, then another message. "You're a good father. Don't forget that when work gets overwhelming." Caleb stared at the text for a long time. Vivian didn't do sentiment, didn't do personal observations that weren't directly relevant to business. The fact that she'd sent this meant something, though he wasn't quite sure what. "Thanks," he typed back. Then, after a moment, "You doing okay?" Another pause. "Ask me again in 90 days when we know if Meridian is staying." Sophie's fever broke overnight. By morning, she was insisting she felt fine and wanted to go to school, but Caleb kept her home anyway. They spent the day watching movies and eating soup, and for a few hours, work didn't exist. By Wednesday, Sophie was definitely better and desperate to return to school so she could tell her friends about being sick. Caleb dropped her off and headed to Axionsphere, where the security implementation had kicked into high gear. Sarah had identified the first critical vulnerability to address, the credential management system that Nathan had exploited. Fixing it required shutting down parts of the network during off-peak hours, which meant Caleb's team would be working overnight shifts for the next 2 weeks. "This is going to make us very popular," David said sarcastically as they reviewed the implementation schedule. "Yeah, well, security isn't a popularity contest." The overnight work was brutal. Caleb would drop Sophie at school, work a full day, grab a few hours of sleep in the evening, then return to Axionsphere at midnight to oversee the network changes. By Friday, he felt like something dredged from the bottom of a lake. Marcus appeared in his office around noon with coffee and a bagel. "You look like hell." "Thanks. That's helpful." Marcus set the coffee on his desk. "I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm saying you need to delegate more. You have a team. Use them." "I am using them." "No, you're micromanaging them because you're terrified something will go wrong and you'll be blamed again." Marcus sat down without being invited. "I get it. I do. But you can't sustain this pace." Caleb wanted to argue, but Marcus was right. He'd been second-guessing every decision, reviewing every line of code, attending every implementation meeting because some part of him still believed that one mistake would undo everything he'd rebuilt. How do I let go when the stakes are this high? You hire people you trust and then actually trust them. Sarah knows what she's doing. David's brilliant. Monica's caught compliance issues that would have bitten us later. They don't need you hovering over every detail. What if they miss something? Then you catch it in review. That's what oversight means. But you can't be the person doing every job. You'll burn out, and then we're all screwed. After Marcus left, Caleb sat at his desk and really looked at his schedule. 18-hour days, 7-day weeks. No time for anything except work and the bare minimum of parenting. Sophie deserved better. He deserved better. That afternoon, he had a team meeting and made a decision. Going forward, I'm delegating primary responsibility for each phase. Sarah, you own penetration testing and vulnerability remediation. David, you own architecture redesign. Monica, you own compliance and audit prep. I'll review your work and handle executive communication, but I'm not going to micromanage the details. Sarah looked relieved. Thank God. I was starting to think you didn't trust us. I trust you. I just didn't trust myself to trust you. That's some philosophical bullshit, David said, but I'll take it. The delegation helped. Caleb's hours became more manageable. He started sleeping 6 hours a night instead of 3. Started having actual dinners with Sophie instead of just making sure she ate something before bed. 2 weeks later, the first critical vulnerability was patched. Sarah ran penetration tests and confirmed the fix was solid. 1 down, 16 to go. Progress felt good. Fragile, but good. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Vivian called an unexpected meeting. "We have a problem," she said when Caleb arrived in her office. "Nathan's lawyer is filing a motion to dismiss the charges. He's claiming entrapment." Caleb felt his stomach drop. Entrapment? We didn't entrap him. He confessed voluntarily. His lawyer is arguing that you baited him into the parking garage meeting specifically to get a confession on tape, that it was a setup orchestrated by Axionsphere to avoid a real criminal investigation. That's insane. Nathan reached out to me first. He's the one who suggested the meeting. I know, Angela knows, but the motion still has to be heard by a judge, which means there's a chance, however small, that the charges could be dismissed. Caleb sat down heavily. If the charges are dismissed, he walks? Potentially, or they'd have to rebuild the case using other evidence, but the confession was the strongest piece. So we might have done all this for nothing. Vivian's expression was grim. We might have. The hearing is in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks passed in a haze of anxiety. Caleb tried to focus on work, on the security implementation, on being present for Sophie. But part of his mind was always stuck on the possibility that Nathan might get away with everything. Angela called him the night before the hearing. "I'm not going to lie to you, Caleb. This could go either way. The law on entrapment is murky, and Nathan's lawyer is good. But we have a strong case. He initiated contact. He suggested the meeting location. He made incriminating statements voluntarily. That's not entrapment. But it's not guaranteed. Nothing in law is guaranteed." The hearing was held in the same courthouse, same courtroom. Nathan sat at the defense table looking more confident than he had at the preliminary hearing, like maybe he believed he had a real chance. His lawyer argued eloquently that Caleb had manipulated Nathan into the meeting, that Axionsphere had orchestrated a sting operation without police oversight, that the entire confession was the product of corporate coercion rather than voluntary admission. Angela countered with the email chain showing Nathan initiating contact, the recording showing him suggesting the meeting, the absence of any threats or promises made to induce the confession. The judge took a recess to review the evidence. Caleb sat in the hallway with Vivian, both of them silent. After 90 minutes, they were called back in. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Cole initiated contact with Mr. Foster and suggested the meeting location. While the presence of a wire recording raises questions about the meeting's purpose, nothing in the record suggests Mr. Foster induced the confession through threats, promises, or other improper means. The statements were voluntarily made. The motion is denied. Nathan's face went pale. His lawyer started gathering papers with jerky, frustrated movements. Outside the courtroom, Angela looked relieved. "That was closer than I wanted it to be, but we're still moving forward. Trial is scheduled for 6 weeks from now." 6 weeks. Another 6 weeks of waiting, of uncertainty, of knowing that Nathan still had chances to escape accountability. But at least the case was moving forward. Back at Axionsphere, work continued. The security overhaul was ahead of schedule. Sarah's team had patched 8 of the 17 critical vulnerabilities. David's architecture redesign was nearly ready for implementation. Monica had arranged for the third-party audit to begin in 3 weeks. Meridian Financial sent a representative to observe the security improvements. The visit went well enough that Claire Dobson sent an email saying they were cautiously optimistic about Axionsphere's progress. Cautiously optimistic. Not a ringing endorsement, but better than nothing. One evening, after a particularly long day of back-to-back meetings, Caleb returned home to find Sophie waiting at the kitchen table with a serious expression. "Daddy, we need to talk." The phrase coming from a 6-year-old was simultaneously adorable and alarming. "Okay, what's up?" "You're working too much again." "I'm working less than I was." "But you're still tired all the time, and you forgot about the school art show on Friday." Guilt stabbed through him. He had forgotten, completely. Sophie had mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and he'd put it in his calendar, but then the calendar had been consumed by Meridian meetings and security implementations and everything else. "You're right, I forgot. I'm sorry." "It's okay. Mrs. Peterson says parents are busy and sometimes they forget things." Sophie picked at the edge of her placemat. "But I drew a picture of you for the show, and you weren't there to see it." The simple sadness in her voice destroyed him. Can I see it now? She retrieved a piece of paper from her backpack and handed it to him. The drawing showed two figures holding hands beneath a sky full of stars, one tall, one small. The tall figure had a smile and messy hair that was definitely supposed to be Caleb. At the bottom, she'd written, "My daddy fixes things." Caleb stared at the drawing, feeling something crack open in his chest. This is beautiful, baby. Mrs. Peterson said it was the best one in the class. But you weren't there. I know, and that's on me. Not on work, not on anything else. I messed up. He pulled her into a hug. I'm gonna do better, I promise. You always say that. I know, but this time I mean it. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and really looked at his life. The promotion was great. The salary was great. The opportunity to rebuild Axion Sphere's security was meaningful work that mattered. But if it cost him his relationship with Sophie, if it turned him into an absent father who forgot art shows and missed bedtime stories, then what was the point? He picked up his phone and called Vivian. She answered on the second ring. It's almost 11. This better be important. I need to set boundaries. There was a pause. Okay, what kind of boundaries? Work hours. I can't keep doing 18-hour days. I have a daughter who needs me present. Not just physically there, but actually engaged. So I'm implementing a hard stop at 6 o'clock unless there's an actual emergency. Define emergency. Active security breach, system failure, something that can't wait until morning. Not meetings that could be emails. Not status updates that could be handled by someone else. Vivian was quiet for a moment. You're right. I've been pushing too hard. You're doing your job. I'm the one who needs to push back when it's too much. Fair enough. 6 o'clock cutoff unless there's a real emergency. I'll let the team know. Thank you. Caleb? For what it's worth, you're the first person who's ever called me at 11 at night to set work-life boundaries. Most people just burn out quietly and then quit. I'm not most people. No, you're really not. The next morning, Caleb implemented the change. He sent an email to his team explaining the new schedule, delegating evening oversight to David and Sarah on a rotating basis. Some of the engineers looked surprised. A few looked relieved, like maybe they'd been waiting for permission to have boundaries too. Marcus caught him in the hallway. I heard about the 6 o'clock cutoff. Good call. We'll see if I can actually stick to it. You will, because the alternative is becoming the kind of father you don't want to be. That Friday, Caleb left work at exactly 6 o'clock. He picked Sophie up from after-school care, took her to the cafe with the oversized marshmallows, and spent an hour just listening to her talk about her day. About the science project with the plants. About her friend Emma who'd lost a tooth. About the new book the teacher was reading to the class. All the small, mundane details that made up a life. On Saturday, they went to the zoo again. Visited Jeffrey the sad penguin. Invented new stories about monkey social dynamics. Ate overpriced ice cream and didn't care about the cost. And on Sunday, Caleb took Sophie to the art supply store and let her pick out new colored pencils. The fancy kind, not the cheap ones. She chose a set with 72 colors and immediately started planning her next masterpiece. I'm going to draw our new apartment, she announced. We're not getting a new apartment. But we could. Now that you have the better job, we could get one with a yard maybe, or at least a balcony. Caleb thought about their cramped two-bedroom with the questionable heating and the landlord who only fixed things when legally required. Thought about the salary increase sitting in his bank account, building up because he'd been too busy to think about what to do with it. You want to move? Sophie shrugged. I don't know. I like Mrs. Chen. And my room. But it would be nice to have more space. Let me think about it. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Caleb started looking at apartment listings. Nothing extravagant, just places with better heating and landlords who seemed functional. 3-bedroom units so Sophie could have friends over. Buildings with maintenance staff and maybe a small yard. It felt strange, looking at places he could actually afford instead of places he could only dream about. The promotion had changed their financial reality, but he was still living like they were one emergency away from disaster. Maybe it was time to stop living that way. Monday morning brought the third-party security audit. The auditors were a team of 3 from a firm that specialized in financial services compliance. They spent the week crawling through Axion Sphere systems, testing controls, interviewing engineers and generally making everyone nervous. Sarah handled most of their questions with the kind of confidence that came from knowing her work was solid. David walked them through the architecture redesign, explaining the security improvements in language they could translate into audit speak. Monica coordinated everything, making sure the auditors had access to whatever they needed. On Friday afternoon, the lead auditor requested a meeting with Caleb and Vivian. They gathered in Vivian's office. The auditor, a methodical man named Richard Chen, who was somehow not related to Marcus, pulled up a presentation on his laptop. We've completed our preliminary assessment. Overall, we're impressed with the progress Axion Sphere has made in the past 6 weeks. Caleb felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Richard continued, "You've addressed all 8 critical vulnerabilities we prioritized in our initial scope. The credential management system has been completely rebuilt with appropriate controls. The monitoring infrastructure is significantly improved, and the governance framework you've implemented demonstrates genuine commitment to security rather than just compliance theater." "So we pass?" Vivian asked. "With recommendations. There are still medium and low priority issues that need attention, and full implementation of the architecture redesign will take another 4 months, but for the 90-day checkpoint, you've exceeded our expectations." After Richard left, Vivian leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a small smile. "We did it." "Sarah, David, and Monica did it," Caleb corrected. "I just coordinated." "You did more than coordinate. You built a team, implemented a functional governance structure, and delivered results under impossible pressure." She pulled up her email. "I'm forwarding this to Meridian right now." The response from Claire Dobson came 2 hours later, short and professional. "Audit results are acceptable. Contract renewal will proceed as scheduled. Well done." It wasn't effusive praise, but it was enough. That evening, Caleb left work at exactly 6 o'clock, picked up Sophie, and took her to look at one of the apartments he'd been researching. A 3-bedroom unit in a better neighborhood, closer to her school, with actual working heat and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests within 24 hours. Sophie walked through the empty rooms with wide eyes, already planning where her bed would go, where she'd set up her art supplies, which room would be for guests, even though they never had guests. "Can we really afford this?" "Yeah, baby, we can." "Can Mrs. Chen come visit?" "Of course, whenever she wants." Sophie hugged him tight, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This was what rebuilding looked like. Not just career and reputation, but actual life, the kind with space to breathe and margins for error. They signed the lease the following week. Moving day arrived on a Saturday in late April, with the kind of weather that made Chicago almost tolerable. Warm sun, light breeze, the smell of something blooming somewhere nearby. Sophie was vibrating with excitement, running between rooms of their old apartment and dramatically announcing which stuffed animal would ride in which box. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway watching the chaos with the expression of someone who'd seen generations of neighbors come and go. "You're really leaving," she said, though she'd known for weeks. Caleb taped another box shut. "Just moving across town. You're still invited for dinner whenever you want. It won't be the same. No more knocking on the door when Sophie needs watching. You can still knock. The door will just be 15 minutes away instead of 15 feet. Mrs. Chen smiled, but her eyes were wet. She'd become more than a neighbor over the years, more like the grandmother Sophie had never had. Caleb felt the ache of it too, this small ending that came with new beginnings. Sophie appeared with her backpack, stuffed so full the zipper barely closed. "Mrs. Chen, I packed the cookies you made, so we can have them at the new place and it'll feel like home." "That's very smart, sweetheart." The moving truck arrived at noon. Caleb had hired professional movers this time, instead of recruiting friends with pickup trucks and bribing them with pizza. Another small marker of how things had changed. By 4 o'clock, they were standing in the new apartment surrounded by boxes. The space felt enormous compared to their old place. Light poured through larger windows. The heating actually worked. The landlord had left a welcome basket with cheap wine and expensive cheese, which felt bizarrely civilized. Sophie claimed the middle bedroom is hers, the one with a window facing east so she'd wake up with the sunrise. She immediately started arranging her stuffed animals on the floor since her bed wouldn't be delivered until Monday. "Daddy, can we paint my room?" "What color?" "I don't know yet. I need to think about it." Fair enough. They ordered pizza for dinner and ate sitting on the floor because their furniture was scattered across 3 rooms in various states of assembly. Sophie fell asleep on a pile of blankets around 8, exhausted from excitement and running in circles. Caleb covered her with a comforter and then stood at the window looking out at their new neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained buildings, parents walking with kids, the kind of place where Sophie could ride a bike without him worrying constantly. His phone buzzed. Vivian. How's the new place? Big, empty, full of boxes. Congratulations. You've achieved middle-class stability. That's not nothing. Caleb smiled. Over the past few months, Vivian's texts had become less formal, more human. She'd started sharing observations about her own life, small details that suggested loneliness underneath the competence. You doing anything tonight? He asked. Working? Why? Because it's Saturday at 9 p.m. and you're the CEO. You're allowed to stop working. I'll stop when you stop checking your email. She had a point. Caleb looked at his phone and saw 3 unread work messages he'd been planning to answer after Sophie fell asleep. True? He suggested. Truce. See you Monday. Sunday they spent unpacking. Sophie insisted on handling her own room, creating an organizational system that made sense only to her. Caleb focused on the kitchen and living room, trying to make the space functional before the work week started. Around 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Marcus stood in the hallway holding a potted plant and looking uncomfortable. I heard you moved. Thought I'd drop by with a housewarming gift. Caleb took the plant, which appeared to be some kind of succulent. You didn't have to do that. I know, but you've been decent about everything, and I wanted to acknowledge that. Marcus glanced past him into the apartment. This is nice. Big upgrade. Yeah, it feels weird having space. You'll get used to it. Marcus shifted his weight. Listen, I also wanted to talk to you about something work-related. Can I come in? They sat in the living room among half-unpacked boxes. Marcus looked like he'd been rehearsing this conversation. I'm thinking about leaving Axion Sphere, he said finally. Caleb blinked. What? Why? Because every time I walk into that building, I remember how badly I failed you. How I prioritized covering my own ass over actually investigating what happened. I can't get past it. Marcus, we've moved on from that. You apologized. We're working together fine. You've moved on. I haven't. Marcus rubbed his face. I've been in tech for 15 years, and I always told myself I was one of the good ones. That I'd stand up for my team, that I'd do the right thing when it mattered. Then when it actually mattered, I folded immediately. That's not who I want to be. Caleb understood the feeling, the gap between who you thought you were and who you actually turned out to be when tested. So what are you going to do? I got an offer from a smaller company. Less money, less prestige, but a chance to start over without carrying all this guilt. Marcus met his eyes. I wanted to tell you first, before I gave notice to Vivian. She's going to try to convince you to stay. I know, but I need to do this. After Marcus left, Caleb sat among the boxes and thought about fresh starts. About the ways people tried to outrun their mistakes instead of learning to live with them. Marcus was a decent person who'd made a bad choice under pressure. Leaving wouldn't erase that, but maybe it would give him space to forgive himself. Monday morning brought the furniture delivery. A bed for Sophie, a couch that didn't have suspicious stains, a kitchen table where they could actually eat meals together. The apartment started feeling less like a construction zone and more like a home. At work, the security implementation had entered its final phase. The architecture redesign was nearly complete. The monitoring systems were operational. The governance framework was producing the kind of boring, consistent results that meant things were actually working. Nathan's trial was scheduled for the following week. Angela had called with final prep instructions, warning Caleb that testifying at trial would be more intense than the preliminary hearing. More aggressive cross-examination, more attempts to discredit his testimony. Nathan's lawyer is going to paint you as someone with a grudge, Angela said. Someone who benefited professionally from Nathan's arrest and therefore had motivation to lie about what happened. That's ridiculous. I benefited because they investigated and found the truth. I know, but that's the narrative they're going to push. Be ready for it. The trial started on a humid Tuesday in May. The courtroom was more crowded this time, with reporters in the back rows and Axion Sphere employees who'd taken personal time to watch. Caleb spotted Jennifer Martinez, the database administrator who'd seen Nathan enter the server room. She gave him a small nod of support. Nathan sat at the defense table in another expensive suit, his expression carefully neutral. His lawyer was the same humorless man from the preliminary hearing, and he looked ready for war. The prosecution presented their case first. Angela walked the jury through the timeline, the evidence, the investigation. She played the parking garage recording, Nathan's voice filling the courtroom with casual admissions of sabotage and framing. When it was Caleb's turn to testify, he felt every eye in the room on him. The oath felt more significant this time, like the words actually carried weight. Angela's direct examination covered familiar ground. The day of the attack, the investigation, the parking garage meeting. Caleb answered carefully, sticking to facts, avoiding emotional language. Then Nathan's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Foster, you've done quite well for yourself since my client's arrest, haven't you? I was reinstated to my previous position and then promoted. Director of Infrastructure Security, significant raise, your own office. Rather convenient timing, don't you think?" Angela objected. "Relevance?" The judge sustained it, but Nathan's lawyer had planted the seed. Caleb could see it in some of the jurors' faces. The question of whether he'd benefited too much from Nathan's downfall. "Mr. Foster, isn't it true that you initiated contact with my client after his arrest was imminent?" "No, Nathan reached out to me first." "But you responded. You agreed to meet him in a parking garage, alone, at night, wearing a wire provided by Axion Sphere's CEO. The lawyer's voice dripped with implication. "That sounds like a setup to me." "It was an investigation. Nathan had destroyed my career. I wanted to understand why. Or you wanted to ensure he was convicted so you could keep your new position and salary." "Objection." Angela was on her feet. "Counsel is testifying instead of asking questions." "Sustained. Mr. Reynolds, stick to questions." But the damage was done. The lawyer had created doubt, suggested ulterior motives, painted Caleb as someone who couldn't be fully trusted. The cross-examination continued for another 30 minutes. Reynolds poked at inconsistencies that weren't really inconsistencies, implied conspiracies that didn't exist, and generally tried to make Caleb look like a liar or a fool. Finally, Angela redirected. "Mr. Foster, did you sabotage Axion Sphere's financial network?" "No." "Did you benefit professionally after the truth came out?" "Yes, but that doesn't change what happened." "Why did you agree to testify today?" Caleb thought about it. "Because Nathan made choices that hurt people. Not just me, but everyone who depended on Axion Sphere's systems. Clients who lost money. Employees who lost faith in the company. If I don't stand up and tell the truth about what he did, then those choices don't have consequences. And they should." It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. The trial continued for 3 more days. Technical witnesses explained the digital forensics. Jennifer Martinez testified about seeing Nathan enter the server room with a physical key. Security experts walked through the evidence of premeditation and planning. Nathan's defense was that he'd been investigating security vulnerabilities in good faith, and that Caleb's framing accusation was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by corporate politics. It wasn't a strong defense, but it was all they had. On Friday afternoon, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Nathan's face went blank. His lawyer immediately started talking about appeals. But for now, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Angela shook Caleb's hand. "Good work. Your testimony was solid. Nathan's lawyer made me look pretty bad. He tried, but the evidence spoke louder than his insinuations." She glanced back at the courthouse. "Sentencing is in 6 weeks. Probably 5 to 7 years given the financial damages and premeditation. 5 to 7 years. A significant chunk of Nathan's life, lost to decisions made in jealousy and ambition." Caleb didn't feel triumphant about it. Just tired. Vivian was waiting by her car, scrolling through her phone. When she saw Caleb, she put it away. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. Glad it's done." "Me too." She unlocked her car. "The board is pleased. This whole nightmare is finally behind us." "Is it, though? We convicted one person, but the security failures that made it possible existed for years. Nathan was just the one who exploited them." Vivian paused, hand on the car door. "You're right, which is why the work you're doing matters. It's not just about punishing Nathan. It's about making sure the next Nathan can't succeed. They stood in the courthouse parking lot, two people who'd been strangers 3 months ago and were now bound together by crisis and recovery. You want to get dinner? Vivian asked suddenly. Caleb checked his watch. 5:15. He'd told Sophie he'd pick her up from after-school care by 6. I can't tonight, but maybe next week? Sure, next week. At home, Sophie was full of questions about the trial, wanting to know if the bad man went to jail and if Caleb had to be brave, and if everything was really over now. Yeah, baby, everything's really over. Good, because I want to show you something. She led him to her room, which had been transformed over the past week into something that actually looked like a child's bedroom. Drawings covered the walls. Books lined a small shelf Caleb had assembled. Her stuffed animals had been arranged in what Sophie insisted was size order, though the logic escaped him. On her desk was a new drawing. 3 figures standing in front of a building with lots of windows. 2 adults, 1 child, all holding hands. That's you, me, and Ms. Vivian, Sophie explained, at your work, because she helped us. Caleb stared at the drawing, something tight forming in his throat. Sophie had picked up on things he'd barely admitted to himself. The way Vivian's texts had become more frequent. The dinners they'd started having occasionally. The slow shift from professional allies to something that might eventually be friends. It's beautiful, baby. Can we give it to her? Yeah, I think she'd like that. The following Monday, Caleb brought the drawing to work. He found Vivian in her office, buried in quarterly reports and looking like she needed a vacation. Sophie made you something. Vivian took the drawing and studied it for a long moment. Her expression did something complicated, shifting between surprise and something softer. She included me. You made an impression. I didn't think kids paid attention to corporate politics. They don't, but they pay attention to people who help their parents. Caleb sat down. She sees you as part of our story now, the person who believed me when it mattered. Vivian carefully set the drawing on her desk, right next to the orange cat picture she'd kept from that first terrible day. 2 pieces of evidence that truth sometimes survived, preserved by a child's observations. I'm going to keep this, she said quietly. She'd like that. Over the next few weeks, life settled into something approaching routine. The security implementation finished ahead of schedule. Meridian Financial renewed their contract without hesitation. The board approved budget increases for ongoing security maintenance. Marcus gave his notice and left Axionsphere with a handshake and what looked like genuine relief. His replacement was a woman named Lisa Chen, still not related to Marcus, who'd spent 10 years in cybersecurity and had exactly 0 patience for corporate nonsense. I like her, Sarah said after Lisa's first week. She doesn't try to micromanage like Marcus did. Marcus was dealing with his own stuff, Caleb said. Sure, but that doesn't mean we have to miss him. Nathan's sentencing hearing brought 6 years in federal prison. Caleb didn't attend. He'd said everything he needed to say at trial. The rest was between Nathan and whatever conscience he had left. Sophie started 2nd grade in the fall. Her new school was better than the old one, with actual art supplies and teachers who seemed less exhausted. She made friends quickly, the way kids do when they're not carrying their parents' stress. One Saturday in October, Caleb was cooking dinner when the doorbell rang. Vivian stood in the hallway holding a bottle of wine and looking uncertain. Is this weird? This feels weird. You're invited for dinner. How is that weird? I'm your boss. You're also Sophie's favorite person who isn't Mrs. Chen. Come in. Sophie appeared from her room and immediately attached herself to Vivian's side, chattering about school and her latest drawings and a book she'd read about dragons who solved mysteries. Vivian listened with the same focused attention she brought to board meetings, asking questions that showed she was actually tracking the conversation. They ate dinner at the kitchen table, spaghetti and meatballs, nothing fancy, and for a couple hours work didn't exist. Just 3 people sharing a meal and conversation that wandered from books to Chicago weather to Sophie's theory that cats were smarter than dogs, but dogs were nicer. After Sophie went to bed, Caleb and Vivian sat in the living room with coffee. She's a good kid, Vivian said. Yeah, she is. You're doing a good job with her. That's not easy to do alone. Caleb thought about all the ways he'd almost failed. The missed art shows, the nights he'd been too exhausted to read bedtime stories, the financial stress that had leaked into every interaction. I'm figuring it out as I go. making mistakes and hoping they're not the kind that cause permanent damage. That's all any parent does. Vivian looked at her coffee. My brother had a daughter. She's 12 now. He barely sees her because his ex-wife thinks he's unstable after the prison time. Maybe she's right. Maybe he is. Or maybe the system broke him and labeled the damage as instability. Maybe. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I sent him money last month for a lawyer to help with visitation rights. He didn't ask for it, but I needed to do something. It was the most personal thing she'd ever shared. Caleb understood it as the trust it was. That's good. Family's complicated, but it matters. Yeah, it does. They talked until almost midnight, conversation drifting from heavy topics to lighter ones and back again. When Vivian finally left, she hugged him briefly at the door. Thank you for tonight. I didn't realize how much I needed normal. Anytime. The months blurred forward. Winter came again, snow falling on Chicago in the same patterns it had the year before. But this time, when Caleb walked through the cold toward Axionsphere's building, he felt different, steadier, less like someone waiting for the next disaster. The security infrastructure hummed along with boring efficiency. Sarah's team ran quarterly penetration tests that consistently came back clean. David's architecture handled traffic spikes without breaking. Monica's compliance reports made auditors happy. It was the kind of success that didn't make headlines. No dramatic rescues, no last-minute saves, just systems that worked the way they were supposed to, protecting people who'd never know they were protected. That was enough. One evening in February, almost exactly a year after everything had fallen apart, Caleb picked Sophie up from school and noticed she was quieter than usual. Everything okay? We had to write about a hard thing that happened to us. For class. Caleb's stomach tightened. What did you write about? When you lost your job and everyone thought you did bad things, but then Ms. Vivian helped us and everything got better. How did it feel to write about that? Sophie thought about it. Sad at first. But then I remembered how you didn't give up. Even when it was really hard, Mrs. Peterson said my essay was brave. It was. You're very brave. I got it from you. The simple confidence in her voice made his chest ache. She believed in him completely, even after seeing him at his lowest. Maybe especially after seeing him at his lowest and watching him fight his way back. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Caleb stood at his window, looking out at Chicago. The city lights spread endlessly, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to track. Somewhere out there, Nathan was in prison, learning whatever lessons 6 years behind bars could teach. Marcus was at his new job, trying to become the person he wanted to be. Vivian was probably still at the office, answering emails and building empires because that's what she did. And here was Caleb in an apartment with working heat and a daughter who thought he was brave, doing work that mattered to people who'd never know his name. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 32, wasn't the career trajectory he'd planned, but it was real and hard-won, and entirely his. The following week, Vivian invited Caleb and Sophie to dinner at her penthouse apartment. The space was exactly what Caleb expected. Expensive, minimalist, with art on the walls that probably cost more than most people's cars. But there were also small signs of humanity. Books stacked on tables, a blanket draped over the couch, photos on a shelf that Vivian quickly tried to hide when she noticed him looking. My family, she explained, from before everything got complicated. Sophie was fascinated by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. She pressed her face against the glass, narrating the lights below like they were stars. They ate takeout Thai food and talked about everything except work. Vivian told stories about growing up with her brother, the trouble they'd caused, the dreams they'd had before reality complicated everything. We were going to start a company together, she said. Something idealistic and world-changing. Then I got practical and he got unlucky, and we ended up in completely different places. You can still fix it, Sophie said with the certainty only children possess. You just have to try. Vivian smiled. You make it sound simple. It is simple. You just call him and say you're sorry and you want to help. I have called him. Then call him again until he believes you mean it. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep on Vivian's couch, Caleb and Vivian sat on the balcony despite the February cold, watching the city breathe below them. She's right, you know, Caleb said. About your brother. Complicated doesn't mean impossible. I know, but knowing and doing are different things. Yeah, they really are. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been forged together by crisis and were now figuring out what they were to each other in calmer times. I talked to the board last week, Vivian said eventually, about expanding our community investment programs. Education initiatives, job training, support for people who've been incarcerated and are trying to rebuild. That's a big shift for Axion Sphere. I know, but watching what happened to you, seeing how close we came to destroying an innocent person because we didn't slow down enough to find the truth, it changed something for me. She looked at him. Companies like ours, we have power. We can choose what we do with it. And you're choosing to actually help people? I'm choosing to try. No promises it'll work, but sitting in this tower making money while the world burns outside feels increasingly pointless. Caleb thought about the version of Vivian he'd first met. Cold, efficient, focused entirely on profit and growth. Somewhere in the past year, that woman had been replaced by someone more complicated. Still driven, still brilliant, but no longer convinced that success only meant quarterly earnings. For what it's worth, I think that's the right choice. We'll see. The board thinks I'm having a midlife crisis. Are you? Probably. But if I am, at least it's a productive one. Spring came slowly to Chicago, winter reluctant to release its grip. But eventually, the snow melted and the trees started budding and the city transformed into something almost beautiful. Sophie turned 7 in April. They had a party at the apartment with her school friends, and the chaos of kids hopped up on cake and juice boxes made Caleb's head hurt in the best way. Vivian showed up with a present, an expensive set of art supplies that made Sophie's eyes go wide. "This is too much," Caleb said quietly. "It's her birthday. Let me spoil her a little." Mrs. Chen was there too, having driven across town with a homemade cake that put the store-bought one to shame. She and Vivian ended up talking for an hour in the corner, two women from completely different worlds finding common ground in their shared affection for one small girl. After everyone left and Sophie was in bed, exhausted and happy, Caleb cleaned up the apartment and thought about community. About the people who showed up when it mattered. About Mrs. Chen and Vivian and Jennifer Martinez and everyone else who'd chosen to see him as a person instead of a problem. That was the real lesson of the past year. Not that systems could fail, he'd always known that, but that people could choose to be better than the systems they operated within. Could choose truth over convenience, compassion over efficiency, connection over isolation. It wasn't a revelation that fixed everything. The world was still broken in countless ways. Companies still prioritize profit over people. Justice still moved too slowly for human timelines. Innocent people still got crushed by systems designed to protect the guilty. But within all that brokenness, there were choices. Small ones, mostly. The choice to investigate instead of assume, to trust instead of doubt, to reach out instead of withdrawing. Those choices didn't guarantee good outcomes. Marcus had chosen to leave because he couldn't forgive himself. Nathan had chosen ambition over integrity and paid for it with 6 years of his life. Vivian's brother had been exonerated but never fully recovered. But the choices still mattered, still created possibilities that wouldn't exist otherwise. On a warm Saturday in May, Caleb took Sophie to Lincoln Park. They visited Jeffrey the penguin, who looked exactly as indifferent as he had a year ago. Sophie had new theories about his emotional state, involving complicated penguin politics that she narrated in elaborate detail. They got ice cream and sat on a bench watching people pass. Families with strollers, couples holding hands, joggers and cyclists, and everyone else trying to enjoy the brief window of decent weather before summer humidity made Chicago unbearable. "Daddy? Yeah, baby? Are we happy now?" The question caught him off guard. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because Sophie was asking it, checking in, making sure the stability was real. "Yeah, we're happy. Are you?" She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about everything. "Mostly. Sometimes I still get scared that you'll lose your job again and we'll have to move." "That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that." She was right. The world didn't offer guarantees. Jobs ended. People left. Disasters happened. You could do everything right and still get destroyed by circumstances beyond your control. But you could also build a life resilient enough to survive those disasters. Could create networks of support and save money for emergencies and teach your daughter that hard things didn't have to be permanent. You're right, Caleb admitted. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise that if it does, we'll figure it out together, just like we did this time. Sophie nodded, satisfied with that honesty. Okay, can I get another ice cream? Absolutely not. But you just said we're happy now. Happy people get ice cream. Happy people also get cavities if they eat too much ice cream. She considered this logic and found it lacking, but didn't argue further. They walked back toward the car, her hand in his, navigating the world together. At work on Monday, Caleb found a message from the board requesting his presence at their quarterly meeting. He'd presented before, but usually with Vivian beside him. This time the email specified he was presenting solo. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday. He spent 3 days preparing, building a presentation that walked through the security improvements, ongoing monitoring results, and recommendations for future investment. Thursday morning, he stood in front of the board and delivered his findings. Robert Henshaw asked pointed questions about cost-benefit analysis. Patricia wanted specifics on compliance metrics. Gerald Reeves, predictably, wanted to know about legal liability reduction. Caleb answered everything, falling back on facts and data instead of corporate speak. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Robert said, "Well done, Mr. Foster. The board is satisfied with your leadership." It wasn't effusive praise, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that he belonged in this room, offering expertise that mattered. After the meeting, Vivian caught up with him in the hallway. "You crushed that." "I just presented facts." "You presented facts with authority. There's a difference." She checked her phone. "Dinner tonight? I know a place that makes excellent pasta." "Can't tonight. Sophie has a school thing." "Tomorrow then?" "Tomorrow works." They'd fallen into a pattern over the past few months. Dinners once or twice a week, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes just the two of them. Conversations that started with work and drifted into personal territory. A friendship built on shared trauma that was slowly becoming something more stable. Caleb wasn't sure what to call it. Vivian was still his boss, still the CEO of a billion-dollar company, still someone who operated in worlds he barely understood. But she was also someone who showed up for Sophie's birthday parties and listened to his concerns about parenting and occasionally let her guard down enough to be vulnerable. Whatever they were building, it felt important, worth protecting. That evening, Sophie's school held an art show featuring student work from the entire semester. Caleb made sure to arrive 15 minutes early, determined not to miss it this time. Sophie's section featured 3 drawings. One showed their new apartment with careful attention to the window placements. Another showed Jeffrey the penguin surrounded by an elaborate backstory rendered in colored pencil. The third showed 3 figures, 2 adults and a child, standing together beneath a sky full of stars. A small placard next to it read, "My Family," by Sophie Foster. Caleb stared at it, chest tight. Sophie had drawn him and herself, which made sense, but the third figure was clearly Vivian, rendered in Sophie's distinctive style with dark hair and business clothes. Sophie appeared beside him, holding a cup of juice and looking proud. "You included Vivian. She's part of our family now, not like a mom, but like someone important who helps us." Caleb knelt down to her level. "Does that feel okay to you, having her around more?" Sophie nodded seriously. "She makes you less sad, and she listens when I talk about things. Plus, she bought me really good colored pencils." Kids had a way of cutting through complexity to the truth underneath. Vivian made him less sad. That was accurate. She'd given him back his career, but more than that, she'd reminded him what it felt like to have someone in his corner, someone who saw him as more than just a problem to solve or a responsibility to manage. "Okay, just checking. Can we get hot chocolate after this?" "Sure, baby. We can get hot chocolate." Friday night's dinner with Vivian was at a small Italian place in a neighborhood Caleb didn't usually visit. The kind of restaurant where the chef knew most of the customers by name, and the menu was handwritten on a chalkboard. They talked about the board meeting, about Sophie's art show, about Vivian's ongoing attempts to reconnect with her brother. "I called him again last week," she said. "Actually had a real conversation. He's considering moving back to Chicago. Said maybe a fresh start would help." "That's good." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm setting both of us up for disappointment." She picked at her pasta. "He's been through a lot. Prison changes people. I'm not sure we can go back to how things were before." "You probably can't, but that doesn't mean you can't build something new." Vivian smiled. When did you become wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a single dad who's made every possible mistake and learned from most of them. That's the definition of wisdom. They finished dinner and walked outside into the warm May evening. Chicago in spring always felt like a promise, like the city was apologizing for the brutal winter by offering a few weeks of actual pleasant weather. Can I ask you something? Vivian said as they walked. Sure. What are we doing? The dinners, the conversations, the way Sophie draws me into her pictures of family. Caleb had been avoiding that question for months, not wanting to examine it too closely, in case it fell apart under scrutiny. I don't know, he admitted. But whatever it is, it feels important. Important how? Like something worth protecting, worth being careful with. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I'm not good at this. At personal relationships that aren't transactional. My entire adult life has been about business, about building companies and winning negotiations. I don't know how to just be with someone. Neither do I. My marriage fell apart because I was always working, always stressed about money, never actually present. I'm still figuring out how to not make those same mistakes. So we're both disasters. Yeah, but maybe we're compatible disasters. She laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. That might be the least romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm trying honesty over romance. Seems safer. They stopped walking, standing on a quiet street corner while the city hummed around them. Vivian looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I like you, Caleb. As a person, not just as an employee or a project. I like your daughter. I like the way you approach problems. I like that you call me out when I'm being too focused on work. And I have no idea what to do with any of those feelings. We could start simple. Keep having dinners, keep being honest with each other, see where it goes without forcing it into some predetermined shape. That sounds terrifying. Yeah, it really does. But she smiled when she said it, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. They didn't have answers, didn't have a roadmap. Just two people who'd been through hell separately and were now trying to figure out what came after survival. Summer arrived with Chicago humidity that made everything sticky. Sophie went to day camp and came home covered in paint and full of stories about art projects involving things that should never be combined. The security infrastructure at Axionsphere continued humming along with boring efficiency. No breaches, no scandals, just systems working the way they should. Sarah got promoted to senior security architect. David left for a job at a startup that offered him equity. Monica started teaching night classes on compliance frameworks. Caleb's team evolved and adapted, and he learned to trust them without constantly hovering. Learned that delegation didn't mean abandoning responsibility, just distributing it among capable people. In July, Vivian's brother moved back to Chicago. She invited Caleb and Sophie to a dinner where he could meet her family, and the evening was awkward and genuine in equal measure. Her brother James was quiet and careful, someone who'd learned not to trust easily, but he softened around Sophie, who asked him direct questions about prison that made the adults wince but that James answered honestly. It was hard, he told her, really hard, but I survived it, and now I'm trying to build a life where that's not the most important thing about me. Like how Daddy had the bad thing happen, but now he's more than just that. James glanced at Caleb with something like understanding. Yeah, exactly like that. In August, Sophie started 3rd grade. In September, Caleb got another promotion, VP of Technology Operations, overseeing not just security but the entire infrastructure division. The salary increase was substantial enough that he started actually saving money, instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. In October, on a cool evening with leaves starting to turn, Vivian came over for dinner and afterwards suggested a walk. Sophie was at a sleepover, leaving them alone in a way they rarely were. They walked through their neighborhood without destination, just moving through the autumn evening. I've been thinking, Vivian said, about what we're doing, about whether we keep pretending this is just friendship or admit it's becoming something else. Caleb's pulse quickened. What do you want it to be? I want to try, really try. Not just dinners and careful conversations, but actual relationship, with all the mess and complication that involves. I work for you. That's complicated. I know. We'd have to be careful about boundaries, about keeping professional and personal separate, but I think we can manage it. And Sophie? She's part of this equation too. I know, which is why we go slow. Give her time to adjust, to understand what's changing. Make sure she's okay with it before we commit to anything. It was the practical approach, the careful one. Exactly what Caleb would have suggested if he'd been thinking clearly instead of feeling the weight of possibility. Okay, he said. Let's try. Vivian took his hand, the gesture simple and significant. They walked back toward his apartment, two people who'd survived disasters separately and were now choosing to face the future together. The year turned again. Winter came back to Chicago with its usual brutality, but this time Caleb barely noticed. He had Sophie, healthy and thriving. He had work that mattered, and people who respected him. He had Vivian, who'd somehow become integral to his life without him quite noticing when it happened. On a Sunday in February, exactly 2 years after the day everything fell apart, Caleb woke early and stood at his window watching snow fall over the city. Sophie was still asleep. Vivian was in the kitchen making coffee, having stayed over in the guest room after dinner the night before. 2 years ago, he'd stood in a parking garage thinking his life was over, thinking he'd lost everything that mattered and had no way to get it back. He'd been wrong. Not because everything worked out perfectly. Marcus still carried guilt he'd probably never fully shed. Nathan was in prison, 6 years of his life traded for ambition and jealousy. Vivian's brother was rebuilding slowly, fighting battles that would probably never fully end. The world was still broken in fundamental ways. Systems still failed people. Justice still moved too slowly. Innocent people still got crushed by circumstances beyond their control. But within all that brokenness, there were choices. Small ones, mostly. The choice to investigate instead of assume. To stand up instead of staying silent. To build community instead of facing everything alone. Those choices didn't guarantee happy endings, but they created possibilities that wouldn't exist otherwise. Vivian appeared beside him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You're thinking too hard. I can hear it from the other room. Just remembering, 2 years ago today, I got fired from this company. Now I'm a VP dating the CEO. Life's weird. Life's whatever we make it." She leaned against him. "And we're making it pretty good." Sophie emerged from her room, hair wild from sleep, and immediately wedged herself between them at the window. "It's snowing again. Can we go to the zoo?" "In a snowstorm?" Caleb asked. "Jeffrey likes snow. He's a penguin." Vivian laughed. "That's solid logic. I'm in if you are." So they bundled up and went to the zoo in the snow, the three of them, visiting a penguin who definitely didn't care about their presence, but who Sophie insisted looked happier than usual. And maybe he did. Or maybe it didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that they were there together, choosing to face the cold instead of hiding from it, building something worth protecting out of honesty and effort and refusal to give up when things got hard. That evening, after Sophie was in bed and Vivian had gone home and the apartment was quiet, Caleb sat at his kitchen table and pulled out his laptop. He started writing, documenting everything that had happened over the past 2 years. Not for publication, just for Sophie. So someday, when she was older and facing her own disasters, she'd have proof that hard things didn't have to be permanent. That you could survive betrayal and humiliation and fear and come out the other side different but intact. He wrote until his coffee went cold and his eyes burned. Wrote about failure and redemption and all the messy complexity between. Wrote about the people who'd helped and the ones who'd disappeared. Wrote about the choices that mattered and the ones that didn't. When he finally stopped, dawn was breaking over Chicago. Another day starting, full of possibilities he couldn't predict and challenges he couldn't avoid. But he'd face them. With Sophie beside him and Vivian in his corner and a community of people who'd chosen to see him as more than his worst moment. That was enough. That was everything.